Chapter 319. Although Caesar had entered a deep slumber, the empire's construction activities had not stopped. Be it economic development or economic construction, they were all flourishing under the guidance of the wise Miss Luna. In reality, it was Hogg, walking on a path of sustainable development. The current Blackwing Empire had already occupied almost the entire northern lands, including all the untouched areas. However, they were faced with the predicament of a vast land with few people, and no one could use the land. According to the recent statistics, the total number of humans in the empire had not even reached 3 million. If the empire wanted to develop in its early stages, it needed enough labor to support it. However, the labor in many industries could not be replaced by the monsters of the Blackwing clan, so it could only be done by humans. Therefore, in order to accumulate energy for the empire's rise, the royal court encouraged the people to have more children. On the other hand, they also loosened the entry standards for outsiders. At the same time, they used a long-established propaganda department to encourage outsiders. The violent geographical changes had already calmed down, but the movement of the Earth's crust had caused the topography of the northern lands to be reborn. The tectonic plates at the edge of Iradia had obviously collided. After a series of violent volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, the original edge of Tahala had raised mountains, and now it had become an extremely steep and tall mountain range. The hills between the mountains had also been raised into plateaus, and the temperature of the plateaus that were completely surrounded by mountains had plummeted, and the oxygen content had dropped by more than one level. Despair Barrier was the name given by the residents around the northern lands to the newly raised mountain range. This mountain range not only created plateaus and deserts, it also blocked the original connection between Iradia and the northern lands. Now, if one wanted to enter the Blackwing Empire, there were only two ways. Either go out to sea from the northern lands port in the narrow sea and sail southward along the coastline, bypassing the Despair Barrier, or go through the desert and pass through the steep and narrow path between the mountains and hills. The plateaus were absolutely forbidden, and no one could pass through. But even so, in the following period of time, the Blackwing Empire still had a continuous influx of outsiders. Some of the newly opened areas began to have houses. Taverns, brothels, and goose houses were the first buildings to appear. As the Blackwing Royal Court's collection was much lower than the other countries in the continent, many farmers and merchants, after observing for a period of time, risked being neighbors with monsters and came to live here. For the outsiders, the royal court had long prepared a comprehensive settlement policy. The farmers could rely on leasing and pledging to obtain land at a relatively low price, but they had to completely follow the royal court's orders and plan to plant. They could not do as they wished. At the same time, the grain trade was a commodity under the empire's high-pressure control and private transactions, and the farmers could only sell their surplus grain to the royal court. Unfortunately, the adventurers who were interested in the wealth of the Black Dragon had basically become decorations on the tower outside the royal court. These greedy adventurers who tried to sneak into the Black's palace were, and they were all hung on the special hooks of the special hooks into the tower's tower. These greedy adventurers who tried to sneak into the Black. In them 6 rows, and 6 or 5 to their been hung their own, and hung them, to the extent to be hung, in hooks to be, of them, of course. Lizard men hung, hanging the lizard men, the of the them, of the ofs. See, yes. The corpses of these fellows gradually rotted, and together with the other prisoners who violated the empire's laws, they finally turned into skeletons. They were still hung on the tall tower, their empty eye sockets looking at the city in front. At night, the specks of fireflies on the skeletons, and the light emitted by the sorcerer's stone on the tall tower, made this building a unique landscape of the Blackwing Empire. It was affectionately and passionately called the Lighthouse of Democracy by the black shirts who served the royal court. As for the other honest adventurers who wanted to collect materials nearby to sell for money, they lived quite comfortably in this place. Every city had enough houses for them to rent. At the same time, in the northern lands, other than the Black Dragon and his clan, there were no other ferocious wild monsters. In this way, collecting materials in the wild became a relatively safe job, and the income was considerable. Because the merchants who settled in the city provided a market, they were responsible for purchasing these materials and transporting them to other places. At the same time, they also sold all kinds of Iradia goods. Everything. The biggest benefit was that the royal court had issued a large number of tax exemption regulations at the beginning of the establishment of the country. The black dragon who was sleeping in the hot spring actually did not rob, and at the same time did not impose excessive taxes on the cities that belonged to him, especially did not ask the merchants to pay tribute. This was something that made the outsiders click their tongues in wonder. However, the policy of opening up the population also brought a lot of trouble. They needed to allocate more power to control, and the royal court needed to teach the fellows outside how to abide by the rules here. In fact, this was simple. Under the threat of blood, the memory of humans was unlimited. The real trouble was the believers of the various gods. In fact, long ago, Caesar had already rejected them once. However, in the eyes of any god, a country that integrated the population and resources was a fertile land waiting to be reclaimed. This new empire gave them enough attraction, tempting their believers to send requests to the royal court of the empire. However, such requests were basically heartlessly rejected. Caesar had said in advance that no matter good or evil, powerful or not, they were strictly prohibited from spreading their faith in the empire. As the ruler, the black dragon did not want to see the people he raised become the servants of the gods. Moreover, Caesar had always had a bad view of the gods. In his opinion, these gods who built temples in sovereign countries and cultivated believers were actually no different from blood-sucking parasites. However, whether he could do it or not was another matter. Although nominally, no gods were allowed to spread their faith in the empire. In fact, Caesar did not dare to do things completely, because if he really did that, it would be tantamount to challenging the operating rules of Iradia and even the entire astral world. He would immediately be defined as a heretic and become the common enemy of the good and evil gods. At this stage, the black dragon still could not do such a thing, and for a long time in the future, he would not dare to do so. Therefore, before falling asleep, Caesar still asked Hogg to open a few doors and allow some irrelevant gods to spread their faith in the empire, such as the goddess of wealth War Jin, the god of knowledge Ogma, the god of nature Obihai, and so on. During this period, the ancestral blue dragon, Alex, had completely recovered from her injuries. Her blue dragon scales flashed with the luster of electric arcs, and not a trace of injury could be seen. At this time, the young ancestral blue dragon had transformed into a tall half-elf beauty. Her existence had been exposed in this war, so Tiamat did not need to seal her and force her to fall into an unconscious sleep again. Alex withdrew from the Northlands, but she did not go far. Instead, she built a nest in the southeast of the Blackwing Empire. After the war ended, she used coercion and threats to force a large number of color dragons to pledge their loyalty to her. She led these evil dragons to form a brand new faction, which took root in the desert plains in the southeast. Accompanied by a few tall rock giants, Alex returned to her lair. She was hidden in layers of yellow sand, but she had horns that protruded towards the sky. Just a moment ago, the tyrant had completed another process of conquest, capturing and enslaving all the clans in the nearby area. Caesar Tangerine. Alex, who had transformed into her human form, held a parchment in her palace and drew on it while softly muttering the name of the black dragon. Although the black dragon with a different body had stayed in his territory during this period of time, there were still countless pairs of eyes watching his every move. Alex had long known that the black dragon with a different body was safe and sound. At the same time, she also understood that the joint efforts of the color dragons and Tiamat had been declared a failure. After this, the Blackwing Empire occupied the vast land of the Tahala Desert and burst forth with a strong vitality, beginning to develop rapidly. As the enemy of Caesar Tangerine, the color dragons had suffered great losses in the previous war. They no longer had the strength to launch another large-scale war. Moreover, the evil dragons were scheming against each other, making it difficult for them to join forces to punish the enemy of the evil dragon mother. Alex looked at her territory. If she wanted to deal with Caesar, she had to absorb more power. Chapter 320. The changes in the Northern Realm had never stopped, just like Caesar's body was always changing. Cracks and craters appeared all over the island, and the vast cavern created by the movement of the Earth's crust formed a terrifying, forbidden land. Collapses and expansions occurred every day, and along with that, lava and intermittent boiling fountains gushed out from underground, forming many colorful hot springs in the sunken ground. Generally speaking, the climate and terrain of the Northern Realm were still developing in a good direction, and such a land was not without existences that wanted to spy on it. At the very least, this place was now very suitable for the red dragon to live in. The blue dragon, the green dragon, and even the black dragon could also build their nests here and live a good life. However, no evil dragon, or rather, no dragon in the vicinity dared to set foot on this land. The majesty of Caesar Tangerine, the Black Dragon King, was not to be blasphemed. The evil dragons did not dare to bet that the mutated dragon would not slaughter the true dragon that dared to appear near his lair. Even the tyrant Alex, who was lurking around, was only thinking about how to trip Caesar and cause trouble, and did not consider the matter of invading this land. Apart from that, the sudden change in the Northern Realm's climate had attracted many outsiders. In the vast lakes and swamps, many creatures such as hippogriff, staghorn beasts, and griffins had migrated here. Following that, there were also elfin creatures that could form contracts with these creatures. Caesar did not care how many animals there were in his territory, and the existence of elfin creatures was not within his sight. That fellow was now in a deep slumber. Meanwhile, the huge and magnificent buildings in the heart of the Blackwing Kingdom, which were almost entirely built of quarried and polished granite, were growing day by day under Hog's command. The soldiers and people under the Black Emperor were fully devoted to the work of building a city for their master. The originally damaged city walls were repaired and carved with various patterns. Large buildings such as theaters, arenas, and arcades began to appear in the city. They occupied the core of the kingdom, and ordinary people were responsible for guarding them, just like the subordinates of a big brother. The complex prison system and transportation channels had also been completed and were connected to the first underground drainage channel. Because of the existence of the gifted Ankhegs, Hog, without the support of any spells, had built an underground channel that could allow the army to march in columns with their heads held high, in order to cope with the possible climate change in the Northern Realm in the future. The construction of the royal city alone had cost the empire a considerable amount of wealth accumulated during this period, and to be honest, many of them were considered cosmetic projects. However, as the main city of the empire, such a project was indeed necessary. Although Caesar himself didn't care about it, he couldn't do without it. This was the symbol and facade of a country, and due to the restrictions of many factors, this was the best result that the empire could achieve at this stage. Hog was smart. If it was only for this reason, he would not have dared to spend so much wealth. Although Caesar was not as stingy with money as the other true dragons, it did not mean that the Black Dragon Lord did not love money. Logically speaking, such extravagant spending would incur the wrath of His Majesty the Emperor. However, Hog considered another matter. Luna, whom the Black Dragon had been longing for, was about to come of age, and the empire was about to welcome its queen. It would be a grand celebration, and the royal city should also look like a royal city. Another consequence of the changes in the Northern Realm's crust was that the passage to the Underdark had been connected. When Caesar first went to the underground laboratory, he discovered that the Demolic and the spellcaster team had excavated a new magic node. After inspection, it was determined that it was a brand new passage to the Underdark. However, the Black Dragon was not interested in it at that time, and did not take the initiative to explore it. He only sent his servants to watch over it, and put it aside. Now this magic node was affected, and the Underdark was connected to Iradia. The underground race quickly discovered this unforeseen event. They attempted to infiltrate the surface and migrate to the underground world along the magic nodes. After discovering this problem, Hogg immediately deployed his army to suppress them. A small-scale war thus unfolded below the Black-Winged Kingdom. The first intelligent creatures to appear on the surface were the Taurens that Caesar had been searching for a long time. These guys with big heads and two horns drove strong Kodo beasts into the Underdark and started a war with the Blackwing army. In addition, there were some Duergar Draconians and a large number of low-intelligence or even unintelligent scaled lizards, terror-claw beasts, flame rats, and so on. This force, if placed in the Lion Kingdom in the Northern Realm, would not be considered weak. It would not be easy for Grand Duke Lionheart to deal with them, and small-scale disturbances would be inevitable. Unfortunately, this time, they kicked a real iron plate. The Blackwing clan had almost perfectly survived the previous war, and after a long period of training and reproduction, their combat power had increased. Those mutated clan leaders were also monsters that ordinary creatures could not deal with. After testing the strength of the opponent's attack, Hogg felt that there was no need to alarm the Black Dragon Emperor. The Blackwing clan's army was enough to deal with all this. The natives of the Underdark had no way to break through the defense line hastily set up by the palace guards. After the support arrived, the army led by the demon hounds and wyverns quickly pushed the front line back and turned into a continuous wall of minced meat, killing all the monsters that tried to invade. The corpses were stored as food. The creatures that lived in the Underdark for a long time did not have delicious meat, and there was a sour taste. However, the Blackwing clan had also inherited their master's good appetite and had always been eating meat. The war was still going on. There was no other way. Although Hogg had the authority to deploy the Empire's army, without the Emperor's order, the Jackalan Great Commander did not dare to make the decision to take the initiative to attack. He did not know much about the new Underdark, so he did not choose to take the initiative to set foot in. In the continuing timeline, Caesar finally woke up. After sleeping for more than half a year, the changes in the Black Dragon's body finally stabilized. On the day the Black Dragon woke up, the lava in the hot spring began to surge like never before. The originally cooled rocks exploded into the sky, and hot spring rain fell on most of the palace. Amidst the electric arcs and boiling hot spring, Caesar slowly stood on the shore of the lava lake. The Black Dragon's body was still flowing with a dark red liquid that was still glowing, and his huge body was bigger than before. Originally, Caesar had already broken the record of the Black Dragon's size in Iradia. Now, after this guy went through this round of sleep, his body length had reached 37 meters, and his height after standing had reached an exaggerated level of 15 meters. His clan army had already been in formation, and the black-clothed humans had also lined up in a neat formation, ready to welcome the return of the Black Dragon Emperor. Countless bread, ale, and honey-roasted meat were placed in the square for the citizens to eat. There were also large pieces of butter and barrels of olive oil. Today was the day of celebration in the Blackwing Empire. Chapter 321. Although this deep sleep had improved Caesar's body size, it did not make his combat strength stronger. Putting aside the new ability he had obtained from the Black Dream, the fusion fire in Caesar's body had not been ignited, and the fission furnace had never been restored to its perfect state. The strengthening of his body, in the ordinary sense, could no longer bring him rapid growth. However, this did not mean that the effect of this deep sleep was worse than before. This time, the adjustment had expanded the volume of the Black Dragon's body as a container. Although it did not increase the volume of water in the container, it allowed Caesar to deal with possible changes in the future in a more relaxed manner. After the events that had happened during this period of time were sorted out, they were reported to Caesar one after another. He soon learned about the development of trade, the migration of people, the construction of the royal city, and the invasion of the Underdark. But compared to these, the first thing that Caesar paid attention to was a group of people who had been sent to the royal court, the goblins. A large group of goblins. A large group of unusual goblins. A long time ago, a large number of goblins had joined the Blackwing clan. These guys were currently serving the Black Dragon Emperor in the arsenal. However, some of the goblins that Caesar saw this time were somewhat different from the dirty, ugly, thin and weak ordinary goblins. Although these goblins also had pointed ears, they looked more like dwarfs with pointed noses. These goblins did not stink. Most goblins were dirty and disgusting, and they emitted a rotting smell. Speaking of which, this was the first time that Caesar had seen goblins that did not stink. The cleverness in these guys' eyes was far from what ordinary goblins could compare to. These characteristics made them very different. If they were mixed in with tens of thousands of ordinary goblins, it would not be a big deal. However, after being selected one by the gnolls and gathered together, they looked like another group. Caesar didn't know where these goblins came from, just like how he didn't know how a genius like Hogg could be born among the gnolls. However, this didn't stop the Black Dragon Emperor from being interested in these goblins. According to the statement of the wild boar in charge, these unusual goblins had a very strong learning ability. They were able to quickly master some of the first jobs in the munitions factory. In addition, these goblins also had an innate talent that the wild boar did not know how to describe. These goblins were very disobedient and always caused trouble in the munitions factory, causing all kinds of explosions by artificial means. Unlike the ordinary goblins, these goblins with sharp noses and extraordinary talents actually started to do research on their own without anyone teaching them. Some of them were passionate about researching ways to create explosions, while others had their eyes on the most common item in the arsenal, steam. They secretly made various modifications to it. These unusual actions were also the reason why they were singled out by the jack-o'-lanterns and boars. Caesar looked at these pitiful goblins kneeling in front of him, trembling in fear. After he asked about the goblins in detail, he had an idea. Unlike the research and development team in charge of magical power, these goblins with a talent for scientific exploration were very suitable to embark on another research path, a path that didn't rely on magic and purely followed the laws of matter. The initiation of thermal weapons, gunpowder. This was the first thing that came to Caesar's mind. Gunpowder could be said to be a must-have farming tool for any transmigrator. The materials came from a wide variety of sources, and the technical requirements were very low. It was extremely easy to make. As long as you knew the best ratio of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter, you could mass-produce gunpowder. However, the Eladians were not stupid. A long time ago, gunpowder had already existed in this world. However, the gunpowder in this world was made up of an extremely high amount of sulfur, some charcoal, mercury, adamantine, and other strange materials. Coupled with the support of magic, it was an arcanitech product. Caesar even felt that it was a deformed product that relied on magic to forcefully create its effect. It cannot display the true effect of gunpowder at all. In a world like Iradia's, thermal weapons couldn't completely replace cold weapons. However, once developed to a certain scale, it wouldn't be difficult to occupy a place or even half of the world. And as a vast world where intelligent creatures had developed for thousands of years, the main reason why there was a blank space in this area was because of the proliferation of supernatural forces. No one in Iradia knew that even without magic as a medium, pure gunpowder was still a very terrifying weapon. Yield was everything, and art was the explosion. Black Dragon gave these unusual goblins a paradise where they could do whatever they wanted, allowing these noisy goblins to tinker with their favorite things. Of course, there was a price. If these fellows couldn't complete the task given by the court, their fate was self-evident. Logically speaking, this matter should have come to an end for the time being. However, that wasn't the case. In this process, Caesar couldn't wait to test out his newly acquired ability. In the court, he released his own radiation. Don't be nervous. The reward from Black Dream wasn't as simple as imagined. There was no doubt that radiation was controllable. The so-called radiation was actually a general overview. After awakening, Caesar knew very well that he could release two different types of radiation, benign and malignant. The goblins mutated very quickly. This was the first time the Dark Dragon knew that the effects of radiation could be so rapid. The long-nosed goblin's first reaction was to heat up. However, The high temperature that was enough to evaporate the water in their bodies was not enough to burn these goblins to death. In this process, their sweat glands were sealed and passively shut down, causing them to be unable to perspire on their own. Following that, under Caesar's observation, the goblins fell into a state of delirium. Their bodies rapidly shrank until they completely lost the ability to move. All of them fell to the ground and fell into a state of shock and unconsciousness. The effects of radiation continued. The bodies of these goblins with sticky green skin were quickly dyed black in their sleep. Their skin also became rougher and thicker, dry and cracked. They were unconscious for a whole month. During this time, these fellows didn't have any food or water. However, they still didn't lose their vital signs and completely die. This phenomenon left the instigator of the incident dumbfounded. The goblin's reaction was far beyond Caesar's understanding of radiation. He thought that benign radiation was the elimination of danger, just like the clan leaders whose bodies had mutated. In reality, the two weren't the same thing. This wasn't radiation at all. Even if it was a magically modified version of radiation. After a month of deep sleep, the goblins lying on the ground finally showed new reactions. Their bodies began to glow and heat up, and they began to emit weak rays that shouldn't have appeared. With his newly acquired super senses and hunting intuition, Caesar could easily observe the subtle changes on these goblins. After the goblins woke up, their fever and mental trance finally subsided. However, the radiation had left irreversible and permanent effects on their bodies. These originally green little fellows had all turned into black monsters, with a dark red mark on their bodies that looked like burns. The appearance of this mark was not accidental. It could be found on every goblin. Although the position was different, the shape was exactly the same. It was like a burning flame or a blooming flower bud. These dark-skinned goblins with dark red marks became Caesar's new subordinates. Their work was also different from the other clans. In order to distinguish these fellows from the ordinary goblins, Caesar named them Red Lotus Goblins. This name would also be kept as a prefix for the Black Dragon after he radiated to the other clans. Chapter 3:22. As early as when Caesar took over the northern kingdoms, he had already planned ahead and made a series of subsequent city plans. Things like assembly line factories, card workshops, and even a newly built weapons research facility were all located in the suburbs and built around the king's city. This way, they could be gathered together for effective surveillance. With the help of spellcasters, the construction of the research facility, which was built with bricks and rocks, was extremely fast. Moreover, it would not affect the construction progress of the empire's other works. The power of money knew no bounds. In just half a month, Caesar had ordered the caravan to purchase a large amount of saltpeter from the kingdom of Swamp in the southwest. Now, all of it was transported to a nearby warehouse to be stored. When it was time to use it, the human servants would grind and weigh it and send it in batches to the weapons research facility of the Red Lotus Goblins. Of course, it was the same for charcoal and sulfur. However, these two materials did not need to be imported. They could be obtained locally in the northern kingdoms. The transportation and mixing of the three materials was done by the monsters of the Blackwing clan. Others could not come into contact with this stage. The advantage of this operation was that it could minimize the risk of the secret being leaked. However, it was only a decrease. If it really attracted the attention of the gods, Black Dragon estimated that he would not be able to hide it for long. The Empire's magical power was still far from reaching that stage. According to the chemical laws in Caesar's memory, the best composition of sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter that could truly unleash the power of gunpowder should be 1:1:5:7:5. However, this was only a formula derived from the laws of matter on Earth. Whether or not Iradia had a better composition required continuous experimentation and exploration. Caesar was very interested in the development of gunpowder. He personally came and sat outside the newly built weapons research facility. He watched as the wild boars weighed out 20 pounds of gunpowder and slowly placed it on a large piece of parchment that was spread out. According to the Black Dragon's requirements, The gunpowder had undergone a series of meticulous processing, such as mashing, soaking, pressing, drying, screening, and so on. Now, it had all appeared as particles of uniform size. In theory, it was extremely dangerous, flammable, and explosive. In order to prevent accidents, the entire production process was independent. The production of gunpowder had not been introduced into the production model of an assembly line for the time being. The process of pouring and weighing the gunpowder was repeated 4 times. The amount gradually increased. The last batch weighed a full 100 pounds. After everything was done, Caesar helped the wild boars to fold the parchment layer by layer. He then watched them use rope to tie it tightly into a ball. That's it. Luna's eyes widened. This thing in front of her was the big treasure that Caesar had mentioned. The black dragon did not hide this from her, so she knew the entire process of making gunpowder. But how could gunpowder be made into gunpowder without the support of magic? Could they only use sound to frighten the enemy? The little fellow thought about it carefully and found that it was indeed feasible. Although she didn't know how the others were, if the sound was loud enough, she would still be scared. Humph, humph. The big black dragon shook his head and ignored her. He snorted twice and stuffed the 4 bundles of gunpowder into his claws. You will know later. About 30 miles south of the Khaki border, in the vast uninhabited area of the Tahala Desert, was the test area that Caesar had designated this time. A part of the Red Lotus goblins and the army had been waiting for a long time. Hog had also come. As the most powerful supporter of the Black Dragon, Caesar felt that it was necessary to let Hog know about such things. This was so that when he fell into a deep sleep in the future, Hog, who was temporarily in charge, could use these new weapons more rationally. According to His Majesty's orders, the army of the Blackwing clan had already pulled up a long cordon. Near the center, there were even wyverns and centaurs patrolling to prevent any outsiders from approaching. Caesar took Luna and made a circle in the air. After checking that there were no mistakes, he nodded and landed in an inelegant manner. Is everything ready? As per your orders, Your Majesty. The wild boar people brought an army and walked over. They were guarding a few huge moving cages. Luna noticed that there were snake owls, terror-claw beasts, and rock giants. In addition, there was an adult horse-gate lizard behind them. The horse-gate lizard again, Luna wiped her forehead. Anyway, as long as it was not something good, the horse-gate lizard would be involved. Other than that, there were also some captives from the Underdark. The large-scale war below the palace was still ongoing. However, ever since Caesar appeared, the monsters of the underground clans all fled back into the underground cave. Caesar did not have the intention to chase after these guys. Therefore, after subduing the Tauren clan, he handed this matter over to the Dark Twin Stars, who had always had a weak presence. He sent Garen and Blakesia to be in charge of integrating the forces of the Underdark. The 2 little dragons were very happy about this. After following Caesar for so long, they already knew that their elder brother had developed and thrived in an enclosed Underdark. This gave them great expectations and dreams as they tried to follow Caesar's path. After undergoing the transformation and removing Tiamat's divinity from their bodies, Caesar was still able to give them some trust. The 2 little dragons were not stupid. At least Garen was not stupid. They probably would not do anything that would bring trouble upon themselves. Very good. Bring the weakest one over first. After waiting for everything to be ready, Caesar handed the smallest amount of gunpowder to Hog. He let the gnoll use his sharp claws to cut a small hole in the sheepskin bag to leak some of the black gunpowder. Even the smallest bag weighed 20 pounds. If it was on Earth, this would already be an extremely dangerous item. However, in Iradia's world, one could not use common sense to measure it. The larger the amount, the better. Black Dragon ordered everyone to retreat and maintain a safe distance. He did not move. He brought little Luna and stared at the ferocious snake owl in the cage. The mass production and test detonation of gunpowder was not something that Caesar did on a whim. Long before this, under his guidance, the Red Lotus Goblin had already done a small amount of ignition test. It turned out that following the formula was indeed feasible. Although he did not know if Iradia had a better mixing method, at least for now, there was no problem in creating gunpowder this way. Therefore, Caesar was not worried about the results. However, he could not help but feel emotional. Compared to the increase of his own strength, this was a completely new feeling. From now on, Iradia was the turning point of history or the turning point of the future. Firearms that purely followed the laws of matter would step onto this stage dominated by supernatural forces. What kind of sparks would appear after the curtains were drawn were still unknown. However, Caesar, Tangerine, and a black dragon would become the curtains of this extraordinary beginning. After waiting for everything to be ready, the black dragon squeezed out a flame jet from between his teeth and ignited the gunpowder. Chapter 323. Year 1650 of the Iradia Third Era, in the Blackwing Empire's Tahala Desert. It was sunny and windless. Luna lay in between the big black dragon scales, looking at the shooting flames and then at the Blackwing clan monsters that had retreated far away. She was somewhat confused. For some reason, the weather in the northern lands had become strange during this period of time. It had rained 2 days ago, and this was the first time she had felt such cold in the northern lands. However, not even a day had passed, and the scorching sun had once again shone upon the land. The high temperature that could roast a person had returned, and the air was filled with a burnt smell. Thinking of this, for some reason, Luna subconsciously shrank her body into the big black dragon scales. The next moment, a deafening sound suddenly rang out. As the distance was too close, the sound wave and the shock wave arrived at almost the same time. Luna felt as if the world had lost all sound in an instant. Strong winds surged, and her ears buzzed. However, the surroundings quickly quieted down once more. The magic necklace on her body had determined that there was something in the outside world that could cause her harm. It automatically took effect, covering the forest fairy's body with a layer of frost armor, isolating her from the shockwave and sound waves. The little fellow raised her head, only to see gravel and soil splattering everywhere like rain. A turbid dark cloud rose from the ground. Compared to Luna, Caesar's observation was much more detailed. He received the impact of the explosion without any protection, but this level of impact did not affect this monster-like fellow. However, unlike the scene of flames soaring into the sky that Caesar had imagined, the black gunpowder explosion could be considered simple. The flames disappeared in a flash, followed by an ordinary explosion. If one did not stare at it, ordinary people would not even notice the appearance of the flames. Logically speaking, this should be the case. The black gunpowder did not rely on flames, but the impact of the instant explosion. Therefore, after the boom, what really appeared was only gravel and soil that had been blown away by the shockwave. Luna opened her eyes wide, looking at this inexplicable scene of rain filling the sky, exclaiming like a child. The fellows from the Blackwing clan, standing further away, were all dumbfounded. Among them, only Hogg knew that they were here to test out a new weapon of His Majesty the Emperor. However, even Hogg did not expect the weapon to be so astonishing. His ferocious wolf face was filled with bewilderment and uncertainty. Hogg was not a mediocre gnoll who had never seen the world. He knew that the scene in front of him was not unique, and it was not difficult to replicate it. It was also possible to rely on a mage to cast powerful spells. Hogg knew in his heart, but he knew that the Emperor did not know magic. There was no magic power in that explosion. Hogg knew it. Where did this kind of power come from? On the other side of the Blackwing clan, the Red Lotus goblins had different reactions. Some of them held their heads and buried their heads in the sand, only revealing their buttocks. They were trembling all over and were scared to death. Some of them were extremely excited, jumping up and down, staring at the center of the explosion with infatuated eyes. They even let out exclamations like "Wah-ag," which were unique to the goblins. The goblins thought that this was their creation. They did not rely on anyone's help to create such an extraordinary and shocking power. This was purely the result of their hard work and research. The short, black goblins shouted loudly, arguing with each other, and even scuffling over this. Even if they were gifted and had been exposed to radiation, it still could not change the nature of the goblin race. Caesar saw the reactions of the Blackwing clan and felt that they were making a fuss over nothing. The black gunpowder was only the beginning of the development of firearms. This kind of prototype product would probably not be much of a big deal in the endless world. The development of firearms to a high level in the future was what the Black Dragon was really looking forward to. After discovering that the little fellow had the protection of frost, Caesar ignored the rolling airwaves and began to crawl forward with his tail wagging. He returned to the center of the explosion. There was a half-meter deep depression in the ground. Although the steel cage was not destroyed by the explosion, it had been overturned. The snake owl that was originally imprisoned in the cage was not completely dead. It used its short and thin legs to grab onto the iron bars, twitching unconsciously. There were only a few shallow wounds on its body. Such injuries were not fatal to creatures like Iradia. What had caused it to suffer heavy injuries were the shock waves from the explosion. The snake owl was an underground race that resembled a lizard but had long hair all over its body. Whether it was vitality or combat power, it was not strong. Its vitality was about the same as that of a terror wolf. The only thing that was worthy of praise was its reproduction rate and fierce temperament. In Caesar's view, this race could only exist as rations for the Blackwing clan. However, even for such a creature, 20 pounds of black gunpowder was not enough to kill it completely. Caesar was a little disappointed. In a world like Iradia, where the vitality level was relatively high, if he wanted to use the black gunpowder in actual combat, he would have to continuously improve it. For example, adding fragments, matching gun barrels, or even directly upgrading it to nitroglycerin explosives, etc. However, the most realistic thing to do now in the experimental site was to directly increase the yield. Change to another one. The black dragon stared at the twitching body of the snake owl and whispered. There was no need for him to teach it a second time. Hog walked over very smoothly. After the wild boar pushed the cage that held the terror claw beast over, he consciously placed the second 30 pounds of black gunpowder in it. This time, other than those timid goblins, every intelligent species opened their eyes wide and observed the details of the black gunpowder's explosion in an attempt to understand how such a magical change occurred. Very quickly, the second explosion rang out. In theory, 30 pounds of black gunpowder was much larger than the previous explosion. However, in reality, there was not much of a difference in the impact. The scene was the same as before. However, this time, when Caesar brought the little fellow to investigate, the terror claw beast used for the experiment was already motionless and completely dead. The snake owl that was left at the side was also not spared. When the 50 pounds of black gunpowder was used for the experiment, the sound of the explosion was like thunder. Most of the Blackwing clan members present showed signs of deafness. When this amount of black gunpowder was used for the experiment, the power of the black gunpowder increased by leaps and bounds. The rock giant used for the experiment almost instantly lost all of its consciousness. The body of this elemental creature, that was like a monolith, was quickly torn apart and lost its magic power. It was blasted everywhere like ordinary rocks. It was only at this point that Caesar was slightly satisfied. The experiment was not over yet. The 100 pounds of gunpowder that was responsible for the finale had not been used yet. However, the rock giant's body was harder than the horsegate lizard, and its vitality was also stronger. Even the rock giant was torn apart by the explosion of 50 pounds of gunpowder. Using the horsegate lizard to test 100 pounds of black gunpowder was meaningless. Caesar looked at the horsegate lizard that seemed to know its fate and was cowering in fear. He pondered for a moment and looked around. He found that there were no other suitable targets for the explosion experiment. I should have brought Erha here, he thought. The wyvern leader's attributes were not weaker than a young true dragon. This was the best time to use it to test the effects of the black gunpowder on the upper and middle class creatures. Now, he could only do it himself. The black dragon breathed out 2 puffs of white smoke from its nose. Hog and little Luna temporarily retreated first. In order to ensure their safety, Caesar ordered them to retreat far away until they could only vaguely see the situation with their eyes. Only then did he begin the experiment. Then this fellow held 100 pounds of gunpowder in its claws and ignited it directly. Chapter 324. Caesar narrowed his eyes, and a majestic force exploded in his hand. Flames flashed and disappeared, and immediately after, a slight tingling sensation came from his claw. The surging force followed closely behind, and the irresistible force tore at his armor. Even forbidden spell and thunder were nothing more than this. This was the inner thought of the black-winged monsters with higher intelligence. Although this comparison was exaggerated, there was no doubt that the force caused by 100 pounds of black gunpowder was indeed astonishing. It was a pity that it was useless to Caesar. Cough, cough. The black dragon coughed twice, and the numbness caused by the explosion quickly disappeared. Other than the fact that his nose was covered in dust because of the stupid experiment, the damage caused by the explosion was infinitely close to zero. When the smoke dissipated, Hog's sharp ears were still buzzing. He sent Luna back to the black dragon's side. The ground around them had collapsed for nearly 2 meters, and the cages used to hold the test subjects had long been blown away dozens of meters away. The particles in the air had yet to settle. It was painful to breathe. Hog swallowed his saliva, and the buzzing in his ears gradually returned to normal after a period of time. At this time, he finally understood why the Black Dragon Emperor kept this new weapon a secret. Was this still the gunpowder he knew? Although the last 100 pounds of gunpowder did not cause any damage to Caesar, Hog, who had been by his side for a long time, knew best what kind of monster Caesar was. This result was not valid at all, and the previous rounds of testing had already proven the power of this new weapon. The most important thing was that as long as one strictly followed the theories given by the Black Dragon Emperor, even the most useless kobold would be able to create such a powerful weapon. Stealing a terrifying power from an unknown source was something inconceivable in the eyes of the Eladian creatures. With all kinds of advantages, this new weapon might not be comparable to a legendary item, but it would definitely be far more powerful than ordinary enchanted weapons. Your Majesty, if we can mass-produce such items and equip the Blackwing clan, the combat power of the army will definitely be maximized, the Gnoll said. Even if he lowered his head, he could not hide the shock in his heart. This was the first time Caesar saw the mature and steady Hog like this. We can tie this weapon to the trained and fearless direwolves and use them to attack every single moving enemy. We can also use the twin-legged flying dragons to launch regional attacks from the sky. Relying on it, we can tear apart all defenses. There is no city wall that can stop the Blackwing clan's advance. After understanding the detonation method and power, Hog almost instantly came up with a plan to use. Sounds pretty good. Caesar shook his head, but we can't do it now. The key to the problem was saltpeter. Currently, there were no saltpeter mines in the north. In fact, even in the whole of Iradia, such mines were very rare and could only be found by chance. Currently, only the Kingdom of Grey Castle in the swamps was known to have mines and produce them. The demand for saltpeter generally appeared between alchemists and upper-class nobles, so the price was not cheap. The recent large-scale import in the north also indirectly raised its price. In addition to mining, there was another way to produce saltpeter. People could pour lime mixture into pig pens, horse stables, and manure pens, and wait for the saltpeter crystals to be separated and collected, and then refine them to obtain them. However, no matter which method, the efficiency of storing saltpeter was not ideal. If it was used to prepare gunpowder, it would quickly be used up. So currently, Caesar was still unable to mass equip the army and throw it into every war. Of course, this problem could not stop the pace of the empire. Emperor Black Dragon had already sent an envoy to visit the Kingdom of Swamps, hoping to establish diplomatic relations with the dwarves in an attempt to establish long-term trade relations with them. On the other hand, the Black Dragon also urged the spellcaster team to change the direction of attack. He let them try to use the separation of nitrogen from the air and then use magic power to produce nitric acid. This was a big project. If the spellcaster team could complete the breakthrough, there would be a step-by-step leap in explosive weapons. With nitric acid, Caesar would not have to think about black gunpowder anymore. He could even start to make gun cotton, nitroglycerin, and even more ridiculous TNT explosives. However, this guy had only heard of these names. After all, he was not a professional chemist and did not know anything about it. In his previous life, Caesar, who only had a professional degree, knew about black gunpowder. As for the manufacturing methods and plans of more advanced things, he was a complete blank. After that, Caesar could only make plans for the direction of development. The real production of weapons still depended on the exploration of the Red Lotus goblins. This was also the significance of the Weapons Research Institute. He could not let the Black Dragon Lord do everything himself. Huge amounts of gold coins and collectibles glittered, but no one looked at them. On the side, Alex reluctantly ignored the attraction of these treasures and focused her attention on the three strange creatures in front of her. The three automatons creaked as they moved their arms and legs, swaying their massive bodies. Although these strange creatures had no eyes, one could still sense the uneasiness, nervousness, and agitation in their hearts through their movements. This should be the first time Iradia has seen such things, Alex thought. The creatures in front of her did not look much different from the elemental golems, but in fact, they were not the same thing. Their scientific name was giant demonized golems, which was generously bestowed by Tiamat. This was a technology that the evil Dragon Mother had obtained from a more developed world under her rule. Now, she had passed it on to Alex to deal with the Black Dragon. These giant demonized golems had the ability to think independently, which was many times more advanced than the war golems that had no consciousness. Their souls were transplanted to Alex's most loyal and capable kin. Not only were they immortal, but they were also immune to most magic like the Titans. In terms of construction technology, these monsters belonged to the category of physical construct life. It was much simpler and faster to make than elemental construct life. Although the technology involved was more advanced, the effect was rather crude. The giant demonized golems only needed to transplant souls into them to be able to move. They did not have an elemental core and relied on the energy of their bodies to move. This way, the only vital point on their bodies completely disappeared. Even if they were split into two, they could still continue to move. The three twisted and ferocious creations were 10 meters tall. Their wolf-like bodies were very suitable for combat. Most of their bones and muscles were made of steel. Their exposed teeth and the ends of their feet were made of harder adamantine. These were just the carriers of their power. There were a lot of true dragon scales on their skin, which came from Alex and her dragons. A faint magic aura wrapped around the giant beast bodies. Dozens of spells had been completed. The inscriptions flowed on these creations, including levitation, acceleration, gravity, and so on. When all the giant demonized golems were completed, Alex would take them to pray for the blessings of the evil Dragon Mother. At that time, these spells inscribed on their bodies would become their own innate abilities. Very good. Alex nodded. Caesar Tangerine had more kin than expected. The appearance of the giant demonized golems could solve a lot of problems for her. At least the human wave tactic wouldn't work, and the demonic beasts would have no problem killing those mutated clan leaders, but they should win more than lose. However, the Black Dragon itself was always a huge problem. Alex knew she didn't have the power to defeat it. Even with the help of Her Majesty Tiamat, she couldn't guarantee that she would win. She had to find more help. Immediately afterward, the Blue Dragon began to do a background investigation, digging into Caesar's history, looking for enemies of the mutated Black Dragon, and preparing to turn all of them into his allies. Chapter 325. The caravan followed the narrow ropeway all the way to the Despair Rampart. As the leader of the caravan, Sotana took the risk to walk in front of the caravan, not to admire the scenery, but to see the walls of the Blackwing Empire as soon as possible. "How much longer until we reach our destination?" he asked impatiently. "Soon, Mr. Sotana. There are beasts everywhere, and the path is difficult. Let us lead the way, the guard behind him said. The guard behind him said. He didn't even need to look his tone and know that he must have a fawning smile on his face. Turning around, Sotana realized that this was indeed the case. When I asked you before, you told me that it would be soon. Now, you're still saying that it will be soon. Did you answer me seriously? I want a concrete answer. The guard was speechless. He adjusted his helmet and said, as long as we walk out of the Despair Rampart, we will reach the Blackwing Empire in no time. The Despair Rampart has been around for a long time, but you have not even drawn a detailed map of it, Sotana said angrily. What did you do the last time the caravan sent you here? Other than bringing me a bunch of barely usable weapons and armor, what else did you do? Seeing the guard leave with a stiff smile, Sotana felt a little better. At the end of the day, the northern lands were still too poor and isolated. Even though they had merged into a country with a ridiculous amount of territory, they still had not built a multi-directional teleportation magic circle in their cities. One had to know that in the trading city-states, the teleportation industry was already quite complete. If it weren't for the fact that Sotana had accidentally stumbled upon some time ago and smelled the scent of profit from it, he wouldn't have wanted to travel all the way to the Northlands in person. As one of the leaders of the trading city-states' famous Clyde merchant group, Sotana was quite famous in the 10 cities. His greatest achievement was that he had opened up a new market and successfully expanded his business to the empire where the sun never sets in the south. Even the trading city-states' Chancellor de Chammer had received an audience with him. The undulating mountain road gradually became smooth. They were walking out of the mountains and into the Tahala Desert. There were many camps and tents on the side near the Mountain of Despair. It was already noon, and the wandering adventurers were busy in making fires and eating. Occasionally, there would be fierce beasts coming out of the forest on both sides, but they did not dare to attack. They just stared at the caravan with malicious eyes. "Pardon me, Mr. Sotana." Miss Nasha, who was traveling with him, lifted the curtains of the carriage and nodded at him. She then asked hesitantly, "Why are you willing to travel such a long distance to personally visit the Northlands?" According to my understanding, the channels to sell goods in the Blackwing Empire have already been established. It seems that there is no need for you to come again. Beautiful lady, do you remember your lovely deck of cards? After Nasha nodded, he continued, "The Northland is the birthplace of this card called Elegy. Since you like it, why wouldn't I bring you here to experience the atmosphere of the birthplace?" "I see." Nasha nodded. She knew that this wasn't the real reason, but since the other party didn't want to talk about it, it meant that this matter might involve some business secrets. She wouldn't continue to ask. The truth was that Sotana smelled the scent of wealth from the Elegy cards. In order to pursue profits, merchants would go through hell and the abyss. Although going to a kingdom ruled by an evil dragon was full of unknown risks, and Sotana knew that it was impulsive to make such a decision, he still trusted his intuition. As for the future development, he would have to wait until he truly entered the Northlands. He would have to do a field survey of the market after the introduction of the Elegy cards and make a judgment based on the actual situation and geographical differences. "Hey, farmland." Following the trade route, the caravan walked out of the barren desert. Someone shouted, "We have arrived at the heart of the Blackwing Empire." Sotana rode on his horse and looked into the distance. He saw rows of knee-high wheat stalks swaying in the wind. Farmers were wearing straw hats as they worked in the fields. It was as if they were in a green ocean. The wheat field stretched north along with the sparkling river. It was impossible to see the end of it at a glance. Although Sotana had already investigated the situation of the Blackwing Empire, he still couldn't help but be surprised. Before this, no one in Iradia could expect that an evil dragon could control a real country and not make a mess of it. "This scenery is really beautiful, Mr. Sotana." Nasha rode on a wildebeest and traveled with him. Her face was full of surprise. "I didn't expect to see a vast farmland not inferior to Jiaxi in such a remote place. Whether it's here or Jiaxi, it's nothing compared to the Rising Sun City." Sotana concealed his surprise and pretended not to think much of it. There, the wheat fields can even connect two cities. Along the way, There is only wheat. It's annoying. Is that so? Nasha could only smile awkwardly. I have never been to the Rising Sun City. As long as you are willing, I can accompany you at any time. Men always pretended to be strong in front of women, and Satana was no exception. After promising Nasha, he turned to the guard who had retreated earlier and asked, "Do the caravans in the northern region know that we will arrive today? I have set the date in the letter I sent them. They will welcome us at the city gate." "That's good." Satana nodded. "I don't want to look for a hotel in a strange city." After nearly half an hour of riding, Satana finally saw the city gate he had been waiting for, Khaki. Although the Blackwing Empire's territory had expanded to the Despair Barrier in name, this was the real border in people's eyes. "Welcome, Mr. Satana." As expected, the Clyde Business Group's representative in the northern region had been waiting for a long time. When he saw this small group of people arrive, he warmly welcomed them. After a simple inspection by the border guards, Satana and his entourage were allowed to enter Khaki. As soon as they walked out of the cold and damp city gate, the wildebeest under him could not help but raise its hooves and neighed. Traveling in Aladia wasn't a safe environment for merchants. Not only would they encounter bandits and refugees while traveling, they would also encounter wild beasts and mutated monsters. Over time, Satana had developed a calmness that allowed him to remain calm in the face of danger. However, even though he knew that the Blackwing Empire was a country where many races lived together, he still didn't expect to see so many ferocious exotic beasts the moment he set foot in this country. Ferocious thorn beasts and ferocious demon hounds, 2-meter-tall beastmen and gray centaurs, wild boar men and battle lizard men with tense expressions were walking freely on the wide streets. Occasionally, the silhouettes of wyverns and shadow manticores could be seen in the sky. What was truly unimaginable was that even with so many terrifying monsters moving about, this city could still maintain a high level of order. Times had changed. Khaki was no longer the Khaki of the past. This border city had its own name, Sulphur Mountain City. Chapter 326. After entering the city, Satana realized that something was wrong. This was a city thousands of miles away from King City and was used as a fortress to defend against foreign invaders. Why did it look exactly like a commercial city? The main road was paved with black gravel, while the other paths were paved with cobblestones. Even the simplest alleyways were no exception. There was no mud on the ground at all. The key was the width of the streets. Satana did not know how the city was designed, but the main road was ridiculously wide. Under normal circumstances, there would be more than enough space for 10 carriages to pass side by side. This is designed for that guy. The merchant seemed to have noticed his confusion. He took out a black money pouch and said, "Everything in this country needs to consider its existence. Can I see it?" Satana turned his head and asked. As an excellent merchant, it was his instinct to maximize profits. If he could communicate with the Black Dragon, he might be able to find more opportunities waiting to be exploited. "I'm afraid it's difficult." This was definitely a problem at the current stage. The clerk looked embarrassed. We just entered the Northland and have not established ourselves. The people in power in this country are all monsters that are difficult to communicate with. There is no room for us to operate." Satana nodded and did not say anything else. "What is this road?" Nasha looked at the ground on the main road. "It feels good to walk on it. It's strangely flat. This thing doesn't have a name yet." The clerk who led the way explained, "They use a gray powder mixed with stones to pave the ground. After sprinkling water, they use polished stones to grind the ground until it's as flat as it is now." "Are there any spellcasters involved?" Satana, who was lost in thought, bent down when he heard this. He touched the ground twice and pointed. "Do you have a detailed production process for this material? Have any spellcasters been asked to deconstruct it?" We heard that this is only the bottom layer. It's not fully formed yet, so..." The clerk explained with sweat on his forehead. When he saw Satana's expression turn gloomy, he quickly changed his words. "I'll send someone to do it right away." As they went deeper into the city, the glamour on the surface was finally gone. Satana saw many houses on both sides of the road being demolished. There were mud houses and wooden houses. Although they were not good houses, they were far from uninhabitable. What a pity. Nasha voiced out his thoughts. These people angered the evil dragon monarch, so they're being chased away. No, these are houses that need to be rebuilt. Rebuild? Nasha asked why. Maybe it's because of the city planning. The laws in this country are too harsh. For some reason, the guide sighed. The newly built houses are all identical brick houses. Whether they are rented or bought, the people are not allowed to expand them privately. They have to submit an application to the city hall. A brick house? All of them? After grasping the main point, Sotana could not believe his ears. This was even more exaggerated than a country where many races live together. Did the ruler of this country have any concept of the cost of building such a house? This barren land could not support such extravagance at all. Not to mention the Black Dragon Emperor's treasure vault. Even the 10 richest ancient dragons would not be enough unless they went to rob it. That's right, they could just rob it. After thinking about this, Sotana's surging emotions calmed down. The Black Dragon Monarch was not a nice guy. It was an executioner, a robber. Perhaps the guy already had such intentions from the start, which was why he dared to spend so much. Just like that, the group gradually arrived in front of a 2-story building. This is the newly built house that we talked about before. We have bought the temporary right to live here. The servants have already cleaned it up, so you can move in at any time. Also, as long as you follow the laws of the Blackwing Kingdom, your safety will be guaranteed. The officer said, Mr. Sotana, if there are no other questions, I will not disturb you. I wish you good night. In Sotana's eyes, this kind of house was too cramped, but it was clean and stable. He had to admit that it was very suitable for civilians to live in. If the cost was relatively low, it would have a certain commercial value. However, it could not be moved to other established countries. After all, no country could be as reckless as the Northlands. Although the journey was long and tiring, Sotana was still full of energy. After a simple 3-hour nap, he put on his clothes again and walked into the night with his guards. Working at sunrise and resting at sunset was the basic norm in Aladia. However, it was also the standard to measure the prosperity of a city. At night, one would be able to see through the bubbles and see the true appearance of a city. Sotana, who went out in the night, was somewhat uneasy. This was a risk. Although the members of the merchant group had repeatedly emphasized the safety of the city, he was still more willing to trust his own eyes. Countless monsters flashed through his mind. Who knew if this orderly city in the day would turn into a bloody abyss at night? Just as he had guessed, the night was quiet. It was no longer as bustling as it was during the day. Occasionally, 1 or 2 distorted shadows would pass by in the dark corners, making people even more frightened. This city could not support activities at night. It was already a dream. However, there seemed to be an exception. The Elegy Tavern never closed its doors. Regardless of which city it was in, ever since its opening, it had always stood tall in the most prosperous district of the city. It had never closed its doors. Even though it was brightly lit, spending a considerable amount of effort and money to stay open all night, and the losses outweighed the gains, it had never changed. The Elegy Tavern sold wine, ale, and Northland liquor to merchants, adventurers, blacksmiths, and singers. Even ferocious, humanoid creatures would enter the tavern. The nobles and believers of the city were also frequent customers. However, the most attractive thing about the Elegy Tavern was not the liquor, but the cards. Cheers to Emperor Black Dragon. The moment he entered the tavern, he heard loud noises from drunken customers who were entertaining themselves. The tavern is the world. The hustle and bustle of the crowd calmed him down quite a bit. However, Sotana's lips curled into a mocking smile. Anyone who could say something like that was either stupid or evil, or both at the same time. Cheers to Emperor Black Dragon. Did these people not know how the Black Dragon and Tangerine ruled the Northland? Did they have no dignity? Or were they willing to become slaves of the evil dragon? What surprised him was that such words were actually acknowledged and echoed by a small group of people. Chapter 327. Boss, 2 more mugs of dark beer. Sotana looked around and found that there were indeed people who raised their glasses and drank with the person who proposed a toast. Most of the people sitting there did not show any dissatisfaction. The rebuttal and angry rebuke that he expected did not appear. This reaction made him frown slightly. A closed country, numb people, such a thought flashed through his mind. Very soon, he suppressed this indignation that came out of nowhere, and a smile like that of an ordinary drinker hung on his face. He raised his foot and stepped over the solid wood carved doorsill and began to walk in. Unlike the quiet city streets at night, this tavern's business was unexpectedly good and lively. He saw the waiters running around, their feet barely touching the ground. They were very busy. Sotana made a rough calculation. Apart from the tavern's employees, there were at least 70 customers in the tavern. This was a huge number for a tavern in a remote city. Most of the customers had their butts pressed tightly against their chairs, and their eyes were glued to the table, as if they were possessed. "Servant, come to my side. You stink like a leper gnome." Sotana heard the voices one after another. He was not in a hurry to ask about these words that he did not understand. Instead, he found a seat and sat down. He then ordered a glass of wine of a reasonable price. Soon, he got the wine he wanted. The waiter's attitude was not good. Perhaps because he was too busy, his face did not have the flattering smile that Sotana was used to, even after he put the silver coins on the waiter's tray. He picked up the wine and took a small sip. To be honest, the taste was really not that great. Not to mention the grape wine and brandy exported by the swamp dwarves. Even the wine brewed by some small workshops in the trading city-states could not be compared to the inferior wine here. Sotana looked around. The tavern's decor was decent and barely acceptable, but the service was terrible. The alcohol and food were bland and boring. Although there were bards playing harps, there were no singers or dancers, which were the men's favorite. From his experience so far, there was nothing that he liked about this place. It was not enough to attract so many customers. Sotana's sharp business sense told him that the only thing that could make this place so lively was the magic of the cards. He began to lean toward the neighboring table. This table was probably the one with the most onlookers. As for the reason for the onlookers, it was because a guy dressed like an adventurer was quickly tearing open the sealed packs of cards. "Ha ha ha! Your luck is even worse than I thought." The adventurer beside Sotana took a sip of wine from his glass and said to the adventurer sitting in his seat. He noticed that this adventurer was one of the people who responded to those stupid remarks, so he discreetly distanced himself from him. "Luck is a very unpredictable thing, but I believe that my luck will change soon. The next pack should be no problem. At the very least, it will be rare or epic." The adventurer rubbed his hands, stacked the cards that had been checked, and put them aside. Then, he skillfully opened the paper seal of another card pack. Another pack. This is already the 12th pack. "Little Antuso, are you going to sell your enchanted longsword?" "Shut up, shameless bastard." Hearing this, the adventurer's eyes suddenly widened, and an imposing aura rose spontaneously. "Those who play the cleric class are not worthy to talk to me." Then, as the cards flashed in front of his eyes, the adventurer's imposing aura suddenly disappeared. His face became extremely dejected, and he slowly slumped into the chair. "I shouldn't have rested in the tavern 3 years ago." Kind laughter sounded around him. But Sotana noticed something more. The gambler's mentality, he told himself in his heart. He had carefully looked at the small cards. Whether it was the normal edition or the so-called collector's edition, although the drawing was excellent, the color scheme was ingenious, and there was even a unique sound design. Sotana knew that these were not the reasons for its success. The real core of this card, called Elegy, was the series of rules and playstyles that were created around it. That was the real value in his eyes, and also where the skills of its creator lay. It was worth learning from every merchant. The scene here had just quieted down, but it was instantly ignited again. "Wow, legendary!" A low exclamation sounded from another table, followed by a loud and exciting card line. "I am the King of Trains." When the golden crystal card appeared, there was an immediate uproar in the crowd. They all crowded toward the table, wanting to see which lucky person had such good luck. Sotana was shocked by the frenzied crowd, but he followed closely behind. With the help of the guards, he squeezed to the front of the crowd. The owner of the card was a young boy. He was dressed shabbily with patches on his clothes and looked to be about 13 or 14 years old. Seeing so many people rushing towards him at once, the boy's expression became nervous. He shrank back to the chair and hid the card behind him to protect it. There was only an open card pack on his table. Dragon God above. This kid only has one expansion pack. A legendary card from one card. This is the blessing of the gods. Little Antuso is probably going to cry. Even if it's a normal legendary card, its value is immeasurable. Not to mention the legendary card from the Tahala Desert expansion pack that was just released. If this card is sold, this kid will have no worries until he reaches adulthood. The King of Trains, Linoa. I heard that Mr. Warren is trying his best to find this card. He said that he wants to create a set of cards called Quick Attack and is preparing to show off his skills in the upcoming tournament. The people were discussing with envy, jealousy, friendliness, hostility, and so on. Sotana gleaned something very important from these gossips. What did he hear? A card that was artificially created for entertainment could actually guarantee a child's life from the age of 14 to adulthood? This seemed rather unbelievable to an outsider like him, but these northerners seemed to take it for granted. There is only one possibility to produce such an effect. This card was very widely recognized in the north, and there was a considerable market demand. In circulation, people recognized its value and were willing to pay for it at a high price. If this was done, from a certain point of view, this legendary card already had the characteristics of precious metals and magical metals, and could sometimes be used as a currency. This was simply unbelievable. After all, these were all man-made industrial products. The production cost of such a card was less than 10 copper coins. Sotana screamed in his heart. He felt that these people were crazy and had overthought things. But after calming down and thinking deeper, he realized that this was not impossible. However, the premise was that the creator of the card had already reached the level of perfection and had the ability to dominate the entire market. Under the influence of the creator, these northerners were actually unaware of such a terrifying thing. If it was him, even with the full support of the Clayt Merchant Group, Sotana admitted that he would not be able to do it. Not to mention the entire north. Even a city that was completely isolated from the outside world would find it difficult to control the entire market. Thinking of this, sincere admiration gushed out from his heart like a tidal wave. This was simply a miracle in Iradia's business history. He was eager to see the mastermind of this matter. Even if it was just a few words of guidance, he was willing to offer a generous reward. Chapter 328. You put these two pieces of iron together, the Black Dragon said. Below the huge body, there was a group of silent spellcasters and Red Lotus goblins. The spellcasters nodded and held the two iron plates. Flames spurted out from their fingers, and the joints melted at a speed visible to the naked eye. That's it. Reduce the magic power and do it again on the back. The spellcasters did as they were told. The two iron plates were joined together at a 90-degree angle and soldered together firmly. This was not difficult. Any spellcaster with a certain level of skill could do it. Even Caesar himself could do it. This psionic black dragon already had the ability to distort matter with his will. Caesar glanced at the joint. The fine vision of the dragon eyes allowed him to clearly see the changes at the joint. A flawless and perfect weld suddenly appeared. If a little polishing was done to remove the traces of the liquid metal when the iron was melted, the two iron plates would be almost no different from a forged body. In the field of welding, it was quite difficult to make a weld smooth and seamless. However, with supernatural power, everything could be easily solved. Well done. The Black Dragon Emperor was not stingy with his praise. Next, weld the other two iron plates together. What is this? Luna popped out from his head and asked. A bucket made of metal. No, this is a cylinder, Caesar corrected her. Cylinder. Luna repeated in confusion. She looked at the welded bucket. This size was just right for her to bathe in. You can understand it as a component of the magic core, Caesar said and glanced at the other square iron plate. Do you see the small hole on it? Air will enter the cylinder from here and push the piston. Well, the piston is a piece of iron slightly smaller than the cylinder's inner diameter. It can move freely inside. Caesar, you're making up new words again. Even though she was used to it, Luna was still a little confused. At this time, it was difficult for a master who studied magic to listen to the Black Dragon's explanation. The little one could not understand. Can't you just tell me what this thing is used for? Is it also an explosive weapon? No, this is a production machine. The steam engine was Earth's most iconic invention. Its emergence brought about the driving force needed for Earth's first industrial revolution. After that, Earth's civilization improved productivity by leaps and bounds, liberating human and animal power. The inspiration for the creation of the steam engine came from the Red Lotus goblins. Some of them were as timid as mice. They were not interested in the development of weapons, and they did not dare to continue the research on gunpowder. Instead, they were curious about the pot lid that kept jumping up and down when boiling water. They secretly researched it, and in the end, they caused an explosion that alarmed Emperor Black Dragon. Caesar was also prepared to shock the world. He would first create the steam engine and think about it later. Its principle was not complicated. Simply put, it was an enlarged version of a boiling kettle. The steam from the boiling kettle was guided into the cylinder, which then pushed the piston and connecting rod. The heat energy was converted into mechanical energy, which was then released outside. The principle was simple, but it did not mean that it was easy to create. The difficulty of this mechanical part was the airtightness of the cylinder and piston, as well as the choice of the material of the transmission pipe. Before the level of metal processing reached a certain level, it was impossible to create a perfect cylinder. The Red Lotus goblins died because of this, but they did not realize the problem. It was not easy to create the steam engine. On Earth, where Caesar was from, it was only after the civilization had developed to a certain level and had enough technological reserves that it was born at the right time. However, in a world where people could weld and mold cylinders with their bare hands, the manufacturing problem could be easily circumvented and solved. Caesar only needed to design 4 metal plates of the same size in advance and provide the blueprints. After that, he would let the goblin factory cast and polish them. Through magic welding and fixing the shape, he would be able to create a completed cylinder. However, this did not mean that everything was fine. There were still some problems that needed to be dealt with. The square cylinder was unable to solve the problem of stress stability. The force in the cylinder was concentrated in the 4 corners. Even without considering the vibration of the machine, the high temperature and high pressure of the piston were enough to destroy the welds at high speed. It would be extremely difficult to maintain the airtightness. Under normal circumstances, the only way to solve this problem was to change the design or choose a material with a higher strength. It was impossible to change the design. It was impossible to change it in this lifetime. Caesar only had these few ideas in his mind. He could not come up with anything more. As for the alloy material with a higher strength, it depended on the development of physics and chemistry. Iradia and the other countries did not walk the same path as the Blackwing Empire. This kind of material could not be imported. The Empire needed time and money to accumulate data in the database. After a large number of successful experiments in the laboratory, the production could be completed. If not for the help of these supernatural forces, Caesar might have to wait for at least 100 years. However, now, Caesar could let the spellcasters use magic to increase the strength and stability of the steam engine. He could make the current steam engine into something similar to an enchanted creation. Of course, this did not mean that the steam engine would always rely on supernatural forces. It was like a toddler learning how to walk, needing a walker. When the toddler grew up and the Empire's various scientific standards gradually caught up, the steam engine would be able to break free from this restriction. It could be produced and operated normally even without spellcasters. Thus, several spellcasters, a group of Red Lotus goblins and their subordinate organizations surrounded the Black Dragon Emperor and played with him for 2 days. Finally, they put together this steam engine in the munitions factory camp. In fact, there was a tool in Alodia that could replace the steam engine. That tool was named Mana Core by the scholars. When needed, the magic stored in the Mana Core would be converted into power output. Its performance was the same as the steam engine, and it was more efficient and portable. However, due to the high cost and difficulty of production, this kind of thing was only used by the ruling class. It was impossible to mass produce it. Your Majesty, this is what you said. The Demolic Leon was full of doubt as he sized up this strange machine. It looked like a sealed furnace filled with all kinds of iron lumps. It looked a bit deformed. Although it was enchanted with magic, it was just some simple stability control magic. Without a magic core, how could it move? Could it be that His Majesty could give it life? Moreover, this thing looked very clumsy. Did it have limbs or wings? How could it move? However, in Caesar's eyes that were filled with a sense of superiority, this seemingly simple machine exuded a different kind of beauty. This was the smell of industry, the fragrance of capital, and also the sign of the rise of the Blackwing Empire. This country was destined to walk a different path. He let the goblins pour 2 buckets of water into the steam room and then lit the firewood below. Soon, the water boiled and bubbled. Gradually, a crackling sound could be heard from the cylinder. This was the sound of the cylinder being heated and expanding. The piston was relatively thin, so the expansion and deformation caused by the heat was greater than that of the cylinder. In the end, it would firmly press against the cylinder wall. Unlike the mage's hesitation, the Red Lotus goblins' eyes lit up when they saw this scene. This was the scene of their experiment back then. These little goblins hurriedly moved forward, trying their best to get closer so that they could observe more closely. When the cylinder was filled with steam, the door to a new world was opened. The piston began to push the connecting rod outwards. When the movement reached its peak, another connecting rod pulled on the sliding valve. The steam pushed the piston back inwards. The 2 connecting rods moved back and forth rapidly. The installed rollers spun rapidly. As the firepower increased, the speed quickly reached its peak. The machine let out a sharp screeching sound. White mist spurted out from the exhaust. It had a kind of shocking aura. What kind of power is this? Ryan asked blankly. As a lich that specialized in spell casting, even though he had seen the entire process with his own eyes, he still did not understand what was driving this iron furnace to move. Chapter 329. The Black Dragon's kin were all war maniacs. So after learning about the function of the furnace, Rain's identity made him subconsciously think about the meaning of war. This soulless object did not need to be fed, did not have the concept of cold and hunger, and did not have emotions similar to fear. As long as it was equipped with armor and a ram in front, it could rampage on the battlefield, just like the war puppets in the South. A war puppet that did not require continuous magic input, Rain said to himself. He was familiar with the process of making it. For spellcasters, making such things was not difficult. As long as there were enough materials, they could continuously produce it in batches. You think too much. This was Caesar's original words. Its power is not produced out of thin air. It is a product of energy conversion. To support it, there must be a large amount of coal resources. Energy supply is an unavoidable problem. Otherwise, even if we can afford to make it, we can't afford to use it. Of course, according to one of the idiots in the spellcasters team, this thing could also rely on the spellcasters to directly provide firepower support. But if that was the case, why was there a need to make this thing? If there was anything, it was better to let the spellcasters do it directly. It was simply superfluous. Caesar, does it have a name? What is it used for? Luna asked curiously. A steam furnace. Its name is a steam furnace. It has many uses. Black Dragon explained. It can be used to transport ores, drain water, smelt, and forge. Wherever there is a need to provide power support, it can be used. In short, It can replace human and animal power as much as possible. Huh? Little Luna was a little confused. Why do we need to replace them? Caesar noticed that the spellcasters also had a hesitant expression. The little one's question was also their question, but they did not dare to ask because they were afraid of the dragon's aura. Even in the history of Earth, the popularity of the steam engine was because the civilization had developed to a certain extent and urgently needed a source of power to replace the inefficient human and animal power to meet the needs of production. When what improved the steam engine, this machine that was in line with the background of that time, quickly became popular and entered into all walks of life. However, the situation in Iradia was completely different. Most countries were content with the status quo and did not need to develop the level of productivity. Even if there was, it was easily solved by the channel of supernatural forces. Caesar did not believe that a world that had existed for tens of thousands of years could not even develop the steam engine. The biggest possibility was that people thought there was a better alternative and did not explore this area. A fantasy world with magic was just like that. Perhaps it was grand and prosperous enough, but in a way, it also indirectly caused abnormal developments in other fields. Everything was born around magic, and magic was the foundation for design and development. Thus, a magic tree that was completely different from the one on Earth grew out of it. Magic and technology. Caesar could not judge which of the two civilizations was better or worse, but he knew that the two roads led to the same destination. At the end of the road, one could master incredible power. It was just that in his personal situation now, if he chose to climb the magic tree, the Blackwing Empire could only follow behind others. He was afraid that they would never be able to catch up with the Rising Sun City, which had developed to the extreme. If he wanted to overtake them, he had to take a completely different road. When the level of science was really developed, dragon scales and magic barriers would be nothing. High-speed, armor-piercing bullets would be equal. If that was not enough, then what about orbital strikes and planet destroyers? Not to mention that the science developed based on the operating rules of the world was meaningless, and the gods could rely on the truth to reverse and destroy it at will. It must be known that when the scientific means really reached that step, in the current context, the rule adaptation hub and the interference hub were definitely the first things that Caesar came up with. However, without thinking, he knew that things would not be so simple. Whether it was the Iradia's overlord, the Rising Sun City, or the gods of the astral world, they would not allow the development of a scientific and technological civilization to reach the extreme. Long before it formed resistance, the Blackwing Empire would be noticed and wiped out by a joint attack. Not to mention the rebellious and faithless science. In fact, even the empire on the Rising Sun City, which relied on the power of magic, had encountered a bottleneck in its development. For nearly 1,000 years, their level of magic had never been able to go up a level, as if it was locked by some kind of force, and it was difficult to make new progress and breakthroughs. This depended on Caesar's ability. Before the rise of the Blackwing Empire's scientific and technological civilization, there was bound to be a rather long and fragile gap period. At this time, there must be the protection of the Black Dragon Emperor's wings to sprout, grow, and develop steadily. At this time, the Blackwing Empire did not have the foundation of an industrial revolution at all. The little bit of industrial genes had just appeared, and they were all in the hands of the imperial court. Therefore, Caesar did not expect to be able to popularize the use of the steam engine, and even rely on selling it in exchange for wealth. The Black Dragon only wanted to put this kind of machine in the Lackland mining area, used for pulling ores and crushing stones. After a period of trial use, he would further improve the steam furnace according to the actual situation. At the same time, he would use this as an inspiration to make up for the technical reserves as soon as possible. When the time was ripe, he would then promote the industrial development from top to bottom. In fact, in Caesar's design concept, the function of the steam furnace was to promote the shipbuilding industry. The Blackwing Empire was adjacent to the West Sea and had the geographical advantage, but it was extremely lacking in maritime power. If they wanted to have the ability to go far, they could only rely on imports, and for this, they had to pay a large amount of money. However, such imports would definitely not last long. Considering the future conflicts of interest, sovereignty issues, and even wars, the Blackwing Empire had to be able to produce sufficiently excellent warships. In Caesar's strategic plan, speed, convenience, and powerful maritime power were the most important factors. A country could not rely on its own silent efforts. If they wanted to accumulate high-level development in various fields, they first had to have money. And where would they get the money? Caesar's order was to first build a port on the west coast, set up a dock, and establish a shipbuilding department. Then, they would import a batch of the current era's best ships from various places and let the department conduct reverse research. Then, they would consider using the steam furnace to replace the magic energy core to create ironclad warships with the Empire's characteristics. When talking to Ren, Emperor Black Dragon pointed out that they had to fully explore the field of science. The various departments should prioritize the allocation of productivity to the heavy industry to raise the level of development. They should strive to complete the early-stage construction of the enchanted steam engine, the steam engine, and the internal combustion engine industry in the second five-year plan. They had to make full use of the working model of concentrating power to do big things, adhere to the excellent concept of science first, magic second, and complete the curve in the field of science in all aspects. Chapter 3:30. The anticipated tournament was about to arrive. In the afternoon, the people flocked to the central square, surrounding it so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. This was even after Hogg demolished the old buildings around the city and doubled the size of the square. In order to achieve enough publicity, the Black Dragon had announced the announcement to the people 2 weeks in advance. The Elegy taverns in various cities had also announced the announcement at eye-catching locations in their taverns. Apart from that, the publicity department had also worked with the commerce department to mobilize the farmers and foreign merchants living in the outskirts of the city to come and watch. That's right. The competition this time wasn't the usual martial arts competition or gladiatorial tournament that was commonly seen in the various countries of Aladia. Instead, it was the Elegy card competition. It would be held the same time in various cities of the Blackwing Empire. After going through a series of complicated shortlisting stages, the victors of each region would receive a ticket to the royal city. In the Blackwing Empire's royal court, under the Sea of Flowers, they would compete for the Glory Trophy, as well as a generous reward that was beyond their imagination. This was the intention of the Black Dragon. The Elegy card had already taken root in the soil of the north, and the Commerce Department was already preparing to open up other markets in the continent. Before that, Caesar was prepared to add fuel to the fire for the Elegy card, using the name of the government to build support for it. No matter the era, the government was synonymous with authority. If the court could support the Elegy card on the surface, the positive impact would be self-evident. It was worth mentioning that the development of the Elegy card was not the willful nonsense of the Black Dragon. Since ancient times, the existence of the entertainment industry was necessary. In any world, especially in a world like Iradia, where social stratification was fixed, the entertainment industry had a very important meaning. This was not an idealistic world. In any era, there would be such a group of people. They were energetic but lacked the right to speak and status. Their strong desires could not be satisfied and vented. These people were usually strong youths. Once there were many of them, the impact was very frightening. Over time, repression would lead to crime and social unrest. If these people had strong racism and were dissatisfied with the current state of the country, the consequences would be even more severe. Therefore, cheap, efficient, and even violent entertainment industries were born, such as taverns, brothels, and arenas. These industries had the ability to attract the energy of these people and satisfy their desires in another way. Regardless of whether it was the past, present, or future, the entertainment industry would not die. Instead, it would change and evolve. It would put on a coat that was in line with the current era and make a comeback. Of course, the Blackwing Empire was a powerful country. Caesar had the ability to suppress all unrest and resistance. However, The cost of doing so was disproportionate. Therefore, Caesar would rather promote the development of this industry. As mentioned earlier, brothels and taverns were the first things that appeared during the reconstruction of the northern lands. The only difference was that the elegy card deck was in the entertainment industry as well. The Blackwing Empire's elegy card deck's true mission was to popularize the Blackwing Empire. It shouldered the heavy responsibility of bridging the gap and abandoning racial differences. Its special trait could allow races with completely different levels of culture, intelligence, and strength to sit at the same table. Although it sounded a little unbelievable, it now appeared that the elegy card deck had accomplished its mission well. However, the main reason for the stability of the country was Caesar's preferential policies after he ruled the northern lands. The carrot policy and the stick policy worked well together, arranging everything clearly. Now, there were very few voices that opposed the Black Dragon Emperor in the northern lands. Even if there were, it was the voices of a few rats hiding in the dark sewers. In order to maintain the development of the elegy card deck according to Caesar's wishes, the royal court's publicity department and the Ministry of Commerce had jointly formed a team that was in charge of the elegy card deck's operations, research, and rule changes. In the past 2 years, the elegy card deck had reduced the frequency of new expansion packs, allowing card players to calm down and delve deeper into the tactics and usage of cards. Some of the changes were also deliberately aimed at nurturing the emergence of high-end card players. This was a project that was constantly evolving, always pursuing a new balance of tactics. Iradia's people were not stupid. With the core data in their hands and the support of the government, the team in charge of the elegy card deck's operations have been growing rapidly. Due to the lack of competitors and the inability of the public to actively screen the cards and other reasons, the elegy card deck's vitality was even stronger than in Caesar's previous life. From Caesar's point of view, the operations team still had a long way to go before they could become a professional. The tournament this time was also a way to unearth talents. In the final round of the King's Court, there might be many players who would be drawn into the King's Court Elegy Project team and directly participate in the Elegy Project. The central square was filled with rows of oak tables and chairs, separated by eye-catching red cloth strips. As a wealthy businessman, Sotana was obviously able to get preferential treatment through his connections. He was arranged to sit closest to the game platform, together with the rising nobles and black shirts. So many people. He sighed softly in his heart. With the game platform as the center, the central square was built with temporary wooden platforms stacked layer by layer. There were 5 rows of wooden platforms in total, which could accommodate at least 200 people. However, the people behind could not see the real scene of the game platform clearly. To ensure safety, the people around the platform were all guards in black shirts. Of course, there was no lack of monsters among them. While they watched the game, they isolated the players from the outside world. It was around 4 in the afternoon, and the scorching sun had receded. It was a good time to start the tournament. Amid the noisy discussions and the occasional cheers, the players went up the arena one by one. To be honest, Caesar had no idea what effect this tournament would ultimately achieve. This matter was fully handled by the publicity department. After Black Dragon handed the planning to the former bard and current publicity department head, Barrett, he had not been involved in this matter. Whether it was publicity or the auditions, it was all done by the publicity department with the cooperation of the Elegy Card Deck Project team. Now that he thought about it, how much experience could a bard have in organizing a tournament? Furthermore, the people under Barrett were all bards who were in charge of publicity. In other words, this was a competition that was completely organized, selected, and arranged by the rookie team. This was Caesar's mistake. Logically speaking, for this type of event, he should have asked Barrett to find the person in charge of the fighting room and arena to assist him. Fortunately, Emperor Black Dragon did not mind failure. This tournament was not for the sake of ticket sales, nor was it a historical event. This was an enlightenment to change one's thinking. If possible, it would also promote the reputation of the Elegy card deck and attract merchants from all over the world to seek cooperation. This tournament was not a one-time event. If it did not do well this time, they just had to work harder the next time. There was no curtain or grand opening ceremony. After a brief speech by the temporary host, the head judge announced the start of the game. The pioneers of the elegy card deck straightened their backs. This was the first time a tournament was held in such a formal setting. It was inevitable that they were nervous. Chapter 331. Alex, who had transformed into her human form, took a sip of black tea and leaned back on the sapphire throne. The throne was ferocious and very hard. Many of the corners had thorns that had not been polished clean. Ordinary people would not be able to stand it, but she liked it very much. Alex's desert palace had accumulated a certain amount of power. In the beginning, some evil dragons would jump out and openly question the ancestral blue dragons, or secretly plot riots. After all, the red dragon, the black dragon, and the white dragon had always been chaotic and unruly. In this regard, Alex had fully unleashed the nature of evil dragons. She did not hesitate to deal with her own kind, hanging them on copper pillars and skinning them. Such punishment was not fatal to the dragons, but the pain they had to endure was unimaginable. With such a set of thunderous methods, the situation was quickly settled. Even if they were dissatisfied, they did not have the power to resist the ancestral blue dragons. It had been almost half a year since Alex had taken over the Northeast. She found that she was liking this place more and more. The endless yellow sand was the most suitable environment for a blue dragon to live in. The palace structure that gradually rose in steps allowed her to stand at the top and look down at the evil dragons, minions, and slaves below. This feeling satisfied her, who had a strong desire for power and control. As the ancestral true dragon, although Alex had more power than the ancient blue dragons, her actual age was far from that level. Moreover, most of her dragon life was in hibernation under the influence of Tiamat. Her experience was shallow, and her mind was not mature. It was easy for her to be driven by all kinds of desires. If she could completely own the North, connect the desert palace and the northern kingdoms, and then decay them into yellow sand and become a veritable land of death, Alex's wish would be fulfilled. Of course, the premise was that she could defeat the Black Dragon and Tangerine and become the king of the North. It was not easy, but Alex continued to work hard. She had already investigated the enemies of the Black Dragon and had begun to contact them. First, it was the master of the trading city of Corhole, the legendary sword St. John Arthur. Secondly, she had also found the legendary party that was defeated by Caesar in a single blow. The Blue Dragon knew very well that BYFF and the others were dragon hunters whose hands were stained with blood. But so what? What they did had nothing to do with her. At that time, she was sleeping, and Alex had no intention of avenging the other evil dragons. In addition to Iradia, there was also the power of the gods. The arrogant and rude Black Dragon had not only angered the Dragon Queen, but also offended the god of black blood, Malor, and the god of war, Quel'Quezad. Alex had already received the Dragon Queen's oracle, and the followers of the two gods would also join in this operation. They might even take action personally in the future. Master, a Draken guard walked into the Lord's Hall and handed over a letter, news from the Blackwing Empire. Hearing the words Blackwing Empire, Alex creased her brows, her crystal-like pupils flashing. She tucked her long black hair behind her ears and sat up straight. She took the envelope and unfolded the thin papyrus in disgust. From the poor quality of the paper, she could tell that the letter was from a spy she had planted in the lower levels of the other party's territory. Understand your enemy as well as you understand yourself. This sentence was very famous among all the intelligent races, and it came from the Bard Schiller. In order to defeat Caesar Tangerine, she had sent many of her trusted subordinates to the Blackwing Empire. There were humans and other races. These people disguised themselves as merchants, fishermen, serfs, or beasts that pretended to join the Blackwing Empire. They sent the information they saw back to the palace. But until now, other than the two humans who disguised themselves as fishermen who continued to update the information, there was no news of the other spies. There is also no news of the monsters who pretended to be foreign races. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. Did they betray her, or were they all eliminated after being discovered by the Black Dragon? Alex's eyes flashed fiercely. She then shook her head and focused on the secret letter. The contents of the letter were written with charcoal, and the writing was crooked. After all, it was not easy to find someone who could read and write among the evil dragon's family. Such a talent was already outstanding enough. Some parts of the papyrus had traces of being soaked in water. It seemed like it was secretly written in a bad environment. The first paragraph said that the Blackwing Empire was making an iron furnace of unknown use, but the description in the text was vague, as if it was not seen clearly at that time. It only said that it was a large iron furnace with various iron rods and teeth on it. This thing seemed to be made in an industrial area. When the author saw it, it had already been pieced together into a whole. Making, there's that word again, Alex thought. The previous secret letter was also like this. Just from the information, the Black Dragon was constantly making new things. Last time, it was making leather and armor. Now, it was making an iron furnace of unknown use. What was that? It must be known that the spies among the serfs were not real serfs, but her carefully selected human dependents. They were clever and knowledgeable. If it was something like a weapon or a puppet, her dependents would definitely be able to distinguish it. It was probably because the iron furnace had not really shown up yet, so it was hard to judge based on bits and pieces. Alex thought that perhaps there would be more detailed information after a period of time. She moved her gaze to the next paragraph. The letter wrote that the Blackwing Empire had mobilized a large-scale caravan to the south. The purpose was unknown, but after returning, a large number of ingots and saltpeter were unloaded from goods. The purchase of saltpeter was easy to understand. Although the climate in the north was much more peaceful than before, it was still very hot. The Black Dragon, who liked water, would definitely find it unbearable. A dragon's nest needed a large amount of saltpeter to cool down, and it could also be used to refrigerate wine and fruit juice. It seems that this guy really knows how to enjoy himself, Alex said with sarcasm. However, the other party's action of purchasing ingots was somewhat puzzling. According to the investigation, the north itself had 4 veins. They had also used some unknown method to reach a deal with the mineral-rich elven forest. In the end, not only did they not sell the ore, but they also continued to purchase and hoard, associating it with the inexplicable iron furnace in the previous paragraph. Alex found it more and more difficult to understand the Black Dragon's actions. Sure enough, these mutated dragons were a bunch of weirdos with jumpy thinking. And when Alex read the last paragraph of the secret letter, she could not help but be even more certain of her thoughts. The Blackwing Empire held a card game in every district and city at the same time. No tickets, unheard of car names, a game that revolved around a set of inexplicable rules. What did this mean? Tangerine, that guy was doing such a thing in his own territory? It even seemed to attract a large group of despicable slaves to watch. Was it joking? Like a retard, Alex crumpled the letter into a ball. Electric arcs jumped from her fingertips and instantly burned it into ashes. She felt that her intelligence had been insulted. Chapter 332. In an empty area not far from the Blackwing Kingdom, the Demolic, whose appearance made one's hair stand on end, was surging with magic energy. He was currently fighting with the Black Dragon Emperor at full strength. Rain was naturally not Caesar's match. However, Caesar had his eyes closed at this moment. He had completely given up on his physical strength and was only relying on his psionic energy to fight. The Black Dragon stayed where he was, and the red light on his scales shrouded his body like a thin mist. The reason why Caesar closed his eyes and fought against Ryan was to test the effect of his hunting instinct. Apart from that, he also wanted to test the power of his spiritual energy. The perception ability granted by the hunting instinct allowed Caesar to control the materialized psionic energy like it was his own arm, and the psionic energy controlled by the mind enhanced Caesar's perception ability. The two complemented each other. Although most of the psionic energy cultivation and usage methods were tailor-made for humans, Caesar could also learn them. With the hunting instinct ability, He could control psionic energy at the same level as the psychic apostles who specialized in psionic energy, or even better. Although Ryan's overall ability was not as good as the Husky and Nero, he was undoubtedly the best in the Empire when it came to casting spells. Caesar did not use his physical strength to fight against Ryan. Although he could use his hunting instinct to sense the outside world and rely on his spiritual energy to resist magic, he was not familiar with it enough. Therefore, he was mostly on the defensive. Of course, if Caesar used his full strength and let the spiritual energy stored in his head pour down, he could also suppress Ryan in a very short period of time. However, what he needed to practice and experience now was fine control of his spiritual energy. He needed to understand Ryan's casting methods so that he could learn some skills and experience by analogy. It was not to decide the winner. On the other hand, Ryan was also having a hard time. He was having a hard time fighting against the Black Dragon. It was not because of Caesar's identity. In fact, he had tried his best, but the spells he cast were always deconstructed by Caesar at the most precise time, disintegrating into elements and dissipating. It was fine at the beginning, but as time went by, the situation became more and more obvious. It was not that he did not know about psionic warlocks, but this was not the usual way of fighting. Under normal circumstances, spellcasters would use elements to construct spells, while psionic warlocks would use their will to display spells. Both sides would use magic and spiritual energy to bombard each other. However, now, no matter the type and strength of Ryan's spells, they would always be destroyed by his opponent in a clever way. Black Dragon had obviously walked on a crooked path. Such a crooked path could only be performed by milliseconds of reaction and the ability to control the subtle changes in the outside world. It was very difficult for normal psionic warlocks to do that. Such a combat style would bring a fatal sense of defeat to a spellcaster. Any spellcaster with emotions would not be able to remain indifferent and calm in the face of such a situation. Although Caesar restrained his body and did not even take the initiative to attack, Ryan did not know when, but when he checked himself, he found that his magic power was almost exhausted. However, at this moment, he still could not touch the Black Dragon, let alone cause any real damage. Ryan cast another death coil. In order to prevent Caesar from deconstructing again, he chose a thankless trick. The Demolic constructed an extremely misleading spell model and covered it with death coil as a disguise. Only then did he attack. To be honest, this was already out of the scope of a normal battle. Ryan would never do this in a battle. If he really encountered an unbeatable opponent like Caesar, the best choice for a spellcaster would be to escape by teleportation instead of turning back to fight. The speed of the spell's flight was not inferior to the speed of sound. Black Dragon could not deconstruct such a spell, and in Ryan's opinion, deconstructing this spell was not a wise choice. The best choice was to rely on the energy of his will to block and destroy Death Coil. This way, his goal would be achieved. However, Caesar did not do so. When Death Coil approached, the air in front of Black Dragon suddenly became turbulent. The spell fell into the quagmire of time, and its speed was reduced to the freezing point. After that, Caesar had enough time to disperse it. Your Majesty, your psionic power has exceeded the boundary of a normal psionic warlock. Ryan sighed inwardly. He took the opportunity to withdraw his staff and took 2 steps back. This was a compliment, but it was also the truth. Caesar heard this and stopped. His horizontal and vertical eyelids opened, revealing a red vertical eye. He shook his head and said, "Perhaps this casting method is more suitable for me. It's a pity that until now, the Empire still hasn't collected more advanced information about the Mind Apostles." Black Dragon let out a low sigh. The reason why he chose to strengthen the training of psionic power control was mainly because Caesar had encountered a bottleneck. His double souls were not enough to support him to the next level. He had reached his limit, and he could not walk a better path by immersing himself in hard work and building a cart behind closed doors. Up until now, Caesar had been collecting information about psionic power. However, Mind Apostles were relatively rare, and their legacies were not as common as spellcasters. It was not easy to find similar books. Still, Caesar quickly composed himself. He was not a dragon who blamed the heavens and others, and the progress of collecting information could not be achieved through strength alone. Seeing Ryan's uneasy expression after hearing his words, he said, "But it's fine. You and Ha will keep an eye on this matter and maintain the progress. I don't expect you to be able to get these things quickly." The Black Dragon and Caesar discussed battle techniques for a while. The Demolic also shared some insights about mana meditation for Black Dragon's reference. After some time, Caesar turned his attention back to his own domain. The tournament was a great success in the Empire. Due to the large number of participants, there were a total of 3 rounds of selections in a week. Many citizens watched more than once. If the first round of selections was due to publicity and mobilization, then the next 2 rounds were completely self-promotional. After that, many citizens who had not come into contact with the elegy card before went to the tavern to ask where and when the finals would be held. The response surprised Caesar. He thought that the decayed and numb citizens were completely attracted to the elegy card. There was almost no chaos or commotion in the entire process. By the time the last 2 rounds of selections began, the audience seats were almost exclusively for the citizens. He wondered what they thought of the orcs, flying apes, and gray centaurs that appeared in the tournament. Another thing to be happy about was that the elegy card had indeed attracted the attention of foreign investors. Many merchants had already submitted applications to the court, hoping to sit down with the authorities in charge to discuss the matter of exporting the elegy card to the foreign market. Caesar took a brief look and found that many of them were not to be trifled with. The most famous one was a merchant named Sotana. His identity investigation revealed that he was one of the leaders of a famous merchant group in a trading city-state. However, Caesar was not in a hurry to summon them. Instead, he asked them to wait patiently until they had finished watching the entire competition and made their own evaluations. After all, the preliminaries were only an appetizer. There would be even more surprises in the finals. In order to give the Black Dragon Emperor the best viewing experience, the operations department of the Elegy brand had spent a lot of time and effort on research and development together with the spellcaster team. They had created a rather effective black technology product and were waiting for the unveiling. Chapter 333. Is this the new ship? On the newly built dock on the west coast, Caesar landed with red flame, frowning as he looked at the sea. There was a strange-looking ship sailing. The ship's shape was strange because of the exposed, wheel-like paddles installed on both sides of the ship. Part of the paddles were submerged in the sea, while the other part was exposed above the sea surface. At this time, the sails were retracted, and the 2 paddles were used to provide the ship with the power to move forward. This was not something that Caesar had made, nor was it a product of the newly established shipbuilding department. It was a ship that already existed in Iradia, a paddle steamer. The people in charge of the shipbuilding department were a boar man and a human. At this time, the human supervisor was wiping cold sweat, facing the sudden landing of the Black Dragon Lord, who could not tell whether it was happy or angry. He lowered his head and trembled. After waiting for a while, the Boarman's supervisor stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, this is a ship imported from the Central Triangle Bay, driven by primitive manpower and magical power." After the Boarman spoke, the human supervisor felt that the pressure had decreased a lot, and he dared to say, "After reverse research and development, we decided to use a single power source, remove the transmission system on the ship, connect the steam furnace power shaft directly to the paddle wheel, and change the intake through several duplex intake pipes to control the power and the ship's speed." "But," Caesar glanced at the man, "but what?" "But this structure will make the ship sluggish, and in a stormy environment, because the paddles are above the surface of the water, the ship will not be stable." The human supervisor lowered his head even more. He did not dare to face the Black Dragon Emperor directly, but he also did not dare to not explain the problem, and did not dare to fool the evil Dragon Lord with vague words, because he knew very well that no matter how he avoided it, the ship would eventually be used for experiments. If the problem was discovered by then, he might not even be able to keep his life. The Northlanders knew very well that their evil Dragon Lord was different from the ordinary Penishade dragons. The black dragon was completely different from those arrogant and careless Pinochet dragons. Some problems could not be hidden from Emperor Caesar. Since he had already spoken, he decided to explain the problem clearly. In addition, the paddles are easy to damage, and it is not convenient to dock at the dock. It is easy to collide with the ships on both sides. And the human snuck a glance at the boreman beside him and said with some deliberation, if the paddle wheel is attacked, or if it is entangled by aquatic plants or other objects, there is a possibility that the paddle wheel will lose its power. Where's the propeller boat I told you about? Caesar frowned. If he simply replaced the magic core with a steam furnace without any improvements, not only would the paddle steamer not become better, it would also lose its advantage of magic conduction and become even worse. The wild boreman manager stepped forward and said, it's still under research. The various technologies of using steam furnaces as power are not mature yet. There are still many problems that need to be solved. The steam furnaces often have problems, and their efficiency is not high. Sometimes, they even lose power directly. If we apply it to the propellers you mentioned, we still need to continue testing. Your Majesty, we still need time. The wild boarmen were not very good at talking, but Caesar would not be dissatisfied like the other dragons. On the contrary, he valued this clan very much. The wild boarmen's honest nature was a trait that many monsters lacked. Caesar turned his neck and looked at the steamer sailing on the sea. Just as the wild boarman and the human manager said, the ship after the change of power was not stable. While they were talking, the ship slowly came to a stop. The paddles on both sides were no longer moving. It seemed that there was a problem with the power. The shipping department has just been established. This is only the beginning stage. Your progress is not slow. Caesar looked at the manager who was embarrassed because the ship had stopped moving. But I hope you could speed up. This is the most important thing. You need money, people, and convenience. The court will support you. The Red Lotus Goblin's weapon research facility and the Manicore's material laboratory are not as rich as your resources. The Black Dragon's attitude and tone did not sound like that of an evil dragon. Instead, he sounded like a real monarch. You don't need to worry about the power source. The spellcaster team is further optimizing the steam furnaces. The finished product will replace the existing steam furnaces. What you need to do is to optimize the adaptation system and the ship. After saying that, Caesar turned his head slightly and stared at the ship on the sea with his vertical eye. In just a moment, the ship seemed to have been hit by a heavy hammer. Many parts of the hull had collapsed, and it was shaking uncontrollably. It seemed like it was about to sink. Is this a ship for fishermen? Caesar stopped using his psionic power. It's too weak to carry my soldiers. Since you guys aren't capable enough, let's brainstorm a little more. In a moment, the royal court will release a message to the outside world, soliciting talents and ideas from both within and outside the country. We'll also provide rewards, and the minimum reward for shipbuilders who can create better ships will be 10,000 gold. Other than the wild boar people who did not have any reaction, the eyes of the humans present turned red. 10,000 gold was nothing to the empire, but it was an exaggeration to an individual. If they did not squander it recklessly, this amount of money would ensure that they would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives. Furthermore, the Blackwing Empire's strict laws and high-pressure control provided a considerable degree of security. People could peacefully enjoy the life brought about by money, and did not need to be cautious and constantly worry about danger. This also indirectly increased the temptation of this bounty. The reason why Caesar began to make gunpowder, steam furnaces, and shipbuilding was not for fun. Although he had not seen the most cutting-edge magical products of the current era, such as the floating fortress and the war golem, he expected that it was not something that an ordinary army could deal with. Even if the Blackwing clan had completed the radiation transformation, he was afraid that they would be helpless in the face of such a magical army. Caesar remembered that a few years ago, the deep-sea countries in the south had tried to land on Iradia. Those sea creatures were not weaker than the monsters on the land, and they were even stronger. However, They were beaten in a smelly fish and rotten shrimp by the rising sun city. They could not hold on for more than a week before they fled back to the sea. Caesar did not take the initiative to provoke the behemoth in the south, but in case he had to face the empire in the future, he did not want to end up in the same situation. He still needed the necessary strength. Otherwise, he would become a persimmon that had no right to speak and could be pinched by others. Now, these were only the beginning. Mechanical golems, orc armored tanks, gray centaur rocket launchers, self-exploding direwolves, demon hounds, propeller flying dragons. These were what Caesar really wanted, and also the path that a mixed empire should take. Relying on magical power alone, with the talent of these monsters in the Black Dragons clan, they could not play. Chapter 334. Barton brought his carefully crafted deck of cards into the capital, heading towards the Empire's tournament. The bright sunlight dyed the world golden. Outside the city walls and along the riverbanks, thousands of tents had been quietly set up. Tens of thousands of civilians from all over the world were flocking over to watch the tournament. The spectacle of the tournament made it hard for Barton to breathe. The shining weapons, the tall armored horses, the loud cheers of the crowd, the bright flags fluttering in the wind, and the monsters, especially the monsters. In Cassan City, Barton had seen many monsters from the Blackwing clan, but today, these monsters had all retracted their usual ferocious looks. They carried small stools and found a place to sit in the square with simple and honest expressions. Noble dragon descendants streaked across the sky above their heads, scattering fine fireworks between their claws. In addition, there were many foreigners that Barton did not recognize. There were people from Narrows Bay and the Western Sea, as well as dwarves from the Kingdom of the Swamps. There were also cunning merchants from the trading cities, as well as noble southern poets. In the eyes of the tourists and merchants from foreign countries, the scene before them was so illusory that it was unbelievable. The countless fictional scenes of humans and monsters living together in harmony in the stories were displayed in front of them just like that, as they waited for the tournament to begin in the square. Barton wore a grayish-blue linen shirt without any ribbons or decorations. The thin gray cloak on his shoulders looked like a dirty rag, but today he was one of the main characters here. The emblem on his chest proved that he was a participant in this tournament. Have confidence, Barton. You're the person in Cassan City who knows the elegy card the best. Your friends, family, the upper echelons of the Empire, and even His Majesty the Emperor will all see your performance on the stage. This kind of opportunity is rare. Before he left, City Lord Cassan had given him a lot of encouragement, but even so, the ordinary craftsman from Cassan City was still a little timid. At this time, it was close to noon. Emperor Black Dragon's mountainous figure slowly appeared at the top of the sea of flowers, attracting a wave of cheers. At this point, the tournament was finally announced to officially begin. Behind the central stage of the palace square, an illusory image was suddenly projected on the black curtain used to decorate the background of the stage opera. Against the pitch-black background, a line of pale golden draconic text with a heavy presence was presented before the intelligent beings from all over the world. Elegy. While people were still pondering over the meaning of the draconic language and how such a scene had appeared on the black screen, a passionate voice reverberated throughout the court square. Welcome to Elegy Tavern. With that, the huge font disappeared and was replaced by the images on the back of the Elegy expansion packs, which were projected in front of everyone. Barton made up his mind and inserted the card that he had spent countless hours constructing into the black box that the staff member had given him. He took a deep breath and began to step forward onto the stage. Unlike the noisy and chaotic auditions, the finals were slow and meticulous. Only one pair of players would be playing at a time, and Barton had drawn a number 1, which meant that he would be the first contestant to go on stage. Due to his mental fortitude, he didn't dare to look at the surging audience below him. He could only sit in his seat without looking sideways. The final stage was larger than he had imagined. His opponent was far enough away that Barton couldn't even see his opponent's face clearly. How was he going to compete? Barton was a little doubtful, but he still followed the staff's instructions and placed a black box on the oddly shaped competition table. After waiting for a while, the passionate voice sounded again. Anduin versus Jaina. The holy light shall grant me victory. You asked for it. The emblems representing the clergy and the mage appeared on the big screen, followed by the portraits of the heroes representing their respective professions on both sides. The heroes said their opening lines, and the first battle officially began under the gaze of everyone in the court square. The background was a wasteland scenery that no one had ever seen before, and when Barton played his first battle follower, the Northshire clergy, something strange happened. A female clergy in a white robe was actually projected onto the final stage, and even her solemn expression was vividly portrayed. This scene immediately caused a huge uproar. Exclamations and faces were everywhere, and it also made Barton's hands tremble slightly. Although he didn't understand how such a scene appeared, he knew that the court had spent a lot of money on it. At this moment, he didn't know why, but tears welled up in his eyes. In the eyes of many, the elegy card was just a fancy and useless plaything, a brand new form of entertainment. Yes, they were right, and there was no way to refute them. But Barton himself had even deeper expectations of the elegy. This game that people talked about had clear goals, clear rules, and a certain degree of randomness. The extremely low threshold and extremely high ceiling made Barton deeply addicted to this game. He had spent countless days and nights studying the strength of each card, the combinations and restraints, and in order to become the best card player in the entire empire, he had wasted countless efforts. Countless times, his family and friends had said to him, "Don't be like this, Barton. This is just a game. Just let it go." But sitting here today, seeing so many people and unusual creatures from all over the empire gathered together, and even His Majesty the Emperor himself, to share this moment together, was simply a miracle to him. The tournament organized by the court and supported by the officials made Barton feel that everything he had done was worth it. He was willing to work hard for such an opportunity. Even if he was a useless mortal, he could still have a glorious moment in his life, standing on the stage and receiving the attention of millions. My turn, card draw. Mine steal. Caesar looked at the surging crowd below, his eyes full of satisfaction. The value of the elegy card was not limited to the present. In the future, it would slowly become a new industry. As time passed, the elegy card would gradually spread to a wider range of people, and the sale of cards would bring in a decent amount of income for the court. But for the market that was still growing, this income would have even more room for imagination in the future. When a large number of people were addicted to the elegy card, after winning over enough supporters, the elegy card would gradually have the ability to support the professional system, and the tournament system behind it would come into being. This was something that would inevitably happen when things developed to a certain extent. Not long ago, there were many private gambling matches between the people of the empire for the elegy card, but these things were firmly forbidden by the court because they could not be taxed. After considering for a period of time, Caesar decided to simply put an end to such competitions among the people, banning them and letting the officials do it themselves. This was the direct reason why this tournament was held. Promoting the tournament industry was a good thing. Caesar noticed the prospects of the elegy card derivative system, not only in the Blackwing Empire, but also in the value that could be gained after exporting it to the outside world. Everything now was in preparation for pushing the elegy card to Iradia. Chapter 335. Come on, Barton. The power of the holy light is no weaker than magic. Because the name of the player was displayed on the background screen, people could know the name of the player on the final stage. Barton heard the cheers from below, but at this moment, he couldn't be distracted. He had to calculate every round without distraction. But where did the holy light come from? He's using a dark priest. No, a dirty priest. Not only does he enter the shadow form, but he also steals the cards of other spellcasters. Is this the power of the holy light? After hearing the cheers, someone immediately refuted. Thanks to the large stage, everyone was able to see the situation clearly. Barton's priests had completely overturned many people's impressions of priests, without even mentioning anything else. Just the fact that Barton's priests had the ability to steal thoughts was more than enough to make people call him shameless. What right do you have to insult someone's innocence like this? This. How can you say that the holy light is dirty? Copy, do you understand? Using the method your best at to defeat you and make you deeply repent. This is the true meaning of the holy light. The speaker was obviously a priest player. Soon, he began to argue with others about this. Then, there were words like, "May the holy light protect you," and "paladin slaughter" that others couldn't understand, filling the audience with a happy atmosphere. The first round ended quickly. Mr. Barton successfully won a round under the protection of the holy light. He used a priest to defeat a mage, but attracted a lot of disdainful gazes. After a short break, the second round of the competition soon began. A 2-meter-tall orc with muscles all over his body walked onto the final stage. This made the audience even more interested. Although before this, many foreign creatures would enter the tavern to spar with people. Due to the influence of intelligence, patience, and other factors, there were basically no foreign creatures in high-end games. Humans were the absolute overlords. Not to mention, in a competition like this that covered the entire empire, there were definitely very few foreign creatures who had the ability to appear here. People even suspected that this guy had received preferential treatment from the Blackwing Palace. Under the questioning gazes, the orc sat on the duel table and placed the warrior emblem. In the background, the orc hero Gal Rosh, who represented the warrior class, had already roared. The original orc language, Lok Tar Ogre. I would rather die than win. Everyone was clearly moved by this line, which was filled with the spirit of facing death with equanimity. Unlike the joy of the previous battle, after the foreign race ascended the stage, the scene gradually became more and more solemn. His opponent was a human, a noble viscount. His deck was made up of high-level cards from the Collector's Edition, which was filled with a large number of glittering legendary cards. His class was also the most popular paladin so far. The news about this noble quickly spread among the audience, and their emotions gradually stabilized. This noble was a seated player of Lackland, and this battle seemed to have no suspense. It seemed that the paladin who had a large number of legendary cards would definitely win. Uther against Gal Rosh. The orc drew a card from his deck and glanced at it briefly. Then, he raised his head and bared his teeth at his opponent. Attack first. He was Entos Adjutant. Flypo. After a frivolous cheer, a twisted pirate riding an ugly puppet appeared on the battlefield and equipped Gal Rosh with a rusty iron hook. And this wasn't the end. In the background behind Gal Rosh, there was a burst of smoke. A short follower took the initiative to jump out and appeared beside Entos Adjutant. It was the legendary card Pirate Patches. Charge Face Slash. Oh, how interesting. The noble player smiled. After all, the orc was still an orc. It was meaningless to add such a low-cost card to the deck for the pleasure of attacking. The Elegy card hero had a total of 30 HP. He just had to give 2 of his HP to the opponent. When the cost gradually increased, the reckless orc would usher in the end. He was definitely going to win this round. The noble player chose to draw a card and skip the turn. The audience thought so too, but Caesar, who was entrenched at the top, had the opposite view. Through the black box behind the scenes, he glanced at the paladin's deck and instantly concluded that this guy would lose without a doubt. This was clearly a deck that did not undergo any combination and relied solely on the strength of a single card. It might be useful to deal with newbies. But this time, the orc Tianhu opposite him opened with 3 pirates and a blazing battle axe. As the strongest fast attack deck at this stage, it was completed under the guidance of Emperor Black Dragon. An inexperienced opponent and a deck that had not undergone any special adjustments had no chance of winning in the face of such an attack that was ahead of its time. Lousy pirates, South Sea boatmen, face slash. Report. The paladin was expressionless as he shook a silver hand recruit. The orc warrior's every move was very fast. This round was even simpler. He directly lifted the blazing battle suit and under a roar of, "I will crush you," he raised his battle axe high and slashed at the paladin fiercely. Due to the overly realistic stage projection, the audience seemed to see the scene of blood splattering everywhere. The young noble was a little flustered. In just 3 rounds, his hero's HP had fallen below 20. After all, the opponent's axe still had 1 more round to go. How could it be so fierce? He hurriedly used his own soldiers to knock down the South Sea boatman with the highest attack power on the scene. Then, he cast a healing holy light on himself to relieve the pressure on his HP. In the 4th round, the real ruthlessness of the orc warrior began to show. The combination of the Bloodsail Disciple and the upgrade made the attack of Gall Rausch's battle axe directly reach 5 points. After a slash, the background of the paladin hero trembled endlessly. Although the battle was not over yet, the audience in the audience seats were completely dumbfounded. They had truly experienced how violent the orc warrior was. Before this, although the warrior class was very popular among the players, the winning rate had never been high. It turned out that they had all taken the wrong path. This was the real way to play the warrior class. This was what a warrior should be like. If you don't win, you'd rather die. This match ended faster than the previous one. In just 3 minutes, the battle had already reached its end. Under the almost crazy and ferocious attacks, the paladin controlled by the young noble could not survive the 6th round. The legendary card that was forcefully pushed out did not have any effect at all. It was chopped into pieces by the orc warrior, who raised the Arcanite gold axe high. The audience was silent for a moment. When they finally reacted, a wave of thunderous applause broke out. They were willing to clap for the orc warrior and celebrate the new fighting style he brought. This was what the Elegy card game should be like. If you could win by just relying on a brainless accumulation of legendary cards, then the Elegy card game would become a game for the nobles. It would not be liked by the common people. The orc brought something different. Although it was a different race, it used its fierce fighting style and fearless spirit to win the respect of everyone. Of course, it also won the attention of the other contestants. Chapter 336. It was the rainy season in the northern region. Dark clouds covered the sky, and rain fell from the sky, splashing on the corridors and windowsills, making pitter-patter sounds. Normally, even during the rainy season, the amount of rainfall in the northern region could be counted on one hand. People could only rely on the rivers and canals to irrigate their fields. However, since the War of God's Punishment, the northern region would welcome a rainy season every year, and the climate would become warm and humid. Your Majesty, the merchant from the trading city has arrived. He is now waiting for you outside the palace. A merchant from the trading city? Caesar thought for a moment and remembered. In order to develop trade with the central city and to promote the Elegy brand to the mainland market, he had agreed to meet a merchant. After all, the trading city was very suitable for commercial development. Because of the nature of the country, the people there were also willing to accept new things. Caesar's needs were all satisfied. When the black dragon twisted his body and entered the hall, the merchant from the central city happened to be led into the room by the battle lizard man. He took off his wet cloak and hat and bowed to the evil dragon monarch. I am Sotana Tillman from the trading city. Greetings, your Majesty Tangerine. Sit. Caesar wagged his tail and shrank his body into the ridiculously large iron chair. He lowered his head and said, "You have dealt with dragons before, right? Why do you ask?" Sotana lowered his head. "You are not afraid of me, human. Your eyes can see through everything. I have indeed had dealings with the gold dragons and silver dragons. True dragons like to trade with the city-states. In my hometown, many merchants have come into contact with dragons." He paused and continued, "But this is the first time I have met such a powerful and majestic true dragon. I am very honored to be summoned by you." As expected, successful merchants were always good at talking. Although he knew that the merchant was flattering and trying to get close to him, Black Dragon still felt very comfortable and laughed. "All right, merchant, let's talk about business." Caesar cut to the chase. Of course, Your Majesty. I'm here for that. Sotana nodded. The Clyde Merchant Group hopes to receive your support in promoting the Elegy card in the trading city. If there is anything you need, please do not hesitate to ask. Before that, you have to tell me. Black Dragon adjusted his position and stared at him. As a merchant from the trading city, what is your main business in the central region? Many, Your Majesty Tangerine. From gems to cloth, from casinos to taverns, including weapons, armor, grains, and vegetables, they are all part of the Clyde Merchant Group's businesses. Sotana put on a formal smile and said in a seemingly casual manner. Caesar thought for a moment. Not only did they sell all kinds of goods, but they were also involved in the service industry and the military industry. If what the human said was true, it meant that this guy had a powerful background. After all, the trade of grain and military equipment was equivalent to half of a country's lifeline. It was not something that could be done with money alone. The black dragon swayed his tail claw gently tapping the armrest of the black iron chair. He had read about the trading city in the central region. When the trading city was first established, some merchants from the south migrated here. They were very adventurous and had a keen sense of smell. They were good at seizing business opportunities and expanding their businesses. In the end, the wealth they accumulated was unimaginable. Many of them were cut off like sheep by the local rulers after making a fortune. A few managed to gain a foothold after going through hardships, bribing local connections, and forming more stable interest groups. Some even formed factions and families. Considering the power behind the merchant, Caesar decided to be straightforward. I need copper, iron, and saltpeter. The more the better. Are you sure it's not gold or silver? Sotana was a little suspicious. Normal dragons would not be interested in such things. However, since the Black Dragon had made the request, he could only go along with it. The Clyde Merchant Group can definitely fulfill your request, Your Majesty Tangerine. We are willing to transport copper and iron or to the Empire at 80% of the market price. As for saltpeter, the central region is not hot, so the market demand is not high. We only have 6 saltpeter farms. This is enough to supply all the nobles in the city with ice during the summer. Caesar was a little surprised. He did not expect to catch a big fish. This ordinary-looking merchant had a big guy hiding in the dark. The Black Dragon's expression did not change. He nodded. Very well. I can cooperate with you on the elegy business, but I want all of these things. Since you said so, Sotana said with a smile, we can specially organize a merchant group for you. We will only be responsible for the Blackwing Empire. We will transport all the things you need to the north and only charge you 80% of the market price. As long as you want it, we will have it ready at any time. However what? I've stayed in the northern lands for a period of time, and I've come to understand how you operate the Elegy brand. I'm impressed. I have to say that you're a model for business. The merchant said, if possible, the Clyde Merchant Group would like to obtain your exclusive rights to the central region, including sales, pricing, and other operating rights. As for the Elegy brand itself, we are willing to purchase it from the court at market price. Regional monopoly. Logically speaking, such a concept should not have existed in this world. Sotana must have been inspired by the Elegy brand's operating methods and methods of profit. That was why he came up with such a new business model. It could be seen that these merchants were indeed unique. Although these authorizations seemed to be just verbal promises, they were actually very significant. It meant that from now on, there would only be one company in the trading city-state that would operate the Elegy business. Even the Blackwing Kingdom itself would not be able to enter and interfere. With the right to set prices, it meant that one had everything. Interesting. Caesar smiled and asked curiously, I want to know something. Even if the empire itself does not develop into a trading city-state, how can you guarantee that there won't be any competitors and that there won't be any other caravans buying cards from the north and selling them in the central lands? You don't have to worry about that. Sotana smiled. As long as you agree to our request, the Clyde Merchant Group will be able to protect our rights within the city. It was obvious that they were very interested in the Elegy brand and were very confident in it. Caesar knew very well how profitable the Elegy brand was, especially for a trump card like the collector's edition. No matter how much it was priced, it would not be excessive. As long as it could satisfy the need to show off, the nobles would rush like ducks. However, due to regional differences, Caesar could not control the development of the Elegy brand in other regions. Moreover, if he wanted to do so, he would need to invest a lot of money, manpower, and energy. Compared to that, it was more cost-effective to give the rights to the local tycoons. The royal court agrees to your request, but the exclusive rights have a time limit. You will need to pay a fee to the empire to sign the contract. The contract price for 1 year is... Caesar thought for a moment. 100,000 gold. This price was a bit exaggerated. It was almost equivalent to half a year's income of the entire Khaki city. It was unimaginable that a buyout agreement would cost this much money. However, it was a business deal, so there was always a need to bargain. Then it's a deal. Please prepare an agreement with a time limit of 10 years. Caesar was stunned. 1,000,000 gold coins for 10 years, which was almost the net income of the empire's assembly line industry. There was no bargaining at all. Was this how the merchants did business? Black Dragon cleared his throat. The price of the Elegy brand will be adjusted according to the market. We're very clear about this. The royal court will send a team to the central region to guide and supervise the operation of the Elegy brand. No problem. You will not be able to interfere with the core rules of the Elegy brand, the card data, and the release date of the expansion packs. You will have to cooperate with the major tournaments in the north. Deal. Damn, it's good to be rich. Chapter 337. The Black Dragon Emperor's words on the west coast were quickly amplified and spread to the outside world. The craftsmen in the shipyard rubbed their hands in anticipation. Even if they couldn't get the huge reward of 10,000 gold, as long as they could give out groundbreaking ideas and techniques, the evil dragon monarch wouldn't be stingy. The trading city-state, the inner city of the sea. Nice. This city that was once famous for its shipbuilding technology was now more and more dilapidated and unworthy of its name. In the middle of the Third Era, the power of magic began to rise. This era was a beautiful era for those ambitious and ambitious people, but for those at the bottom of society who had no power and wanted to live a stable life, it was no less than a nightmare. Nice was one of the oldest cities in the trading city-state. This water capital, located on the coast, was hit by storms every year, and there were no main materials to support the shipbuilding industry within its borders, wood and steel. Everything could only be imported from other cities. In the beginning, the successive heads of the trading city-state were very supportive of Nice development and gave the city all kinds of conveniences. However, as the world changed in recent years, the city-state's sea power had reached a critical point. After the rulers shifted their focus to land construction, Nice was gradually neglected and slowly declined. The increase in the price of materials caused the profits of shipyards to continuously decline. Coupled with the economic downturn of the whole industry and the lack of support from the state's policies, business continued to decline. In order to survive, many shipyards began to actively transform. What followed was the number of unemployed people increased, and a large number of unemployed people were forced to hoard, causing the security of the entire city to deteriorate and the reputation of the city to deteriorate. Nice's popularity among the 10 cities was now at the bottom. Unless it was necessary, very few people were willing to come to this city. The decrease in the floating population further led to the rise of unemployment in other industries, and a vicious cycle appeared. The government was indifferent to this, and the people couldn't rely on themselves to get out of this predicament. The disheartened residents gave up on themselves and were intoxicated by the anesthesia of alcohol. They were indifferent to their families and children, and the whole city was lifeless. Many people who grew up and loved this city were pessimistic when faced with this situation. Unless there was a war on the sea and the demand of the city-state skyrocketed, this city would become an island drowned by the sea sooner or later and completely die. Many people who could afford to leave this city were trying to find ways to escape from this hopeless and hopeless city. Corvette walked into the shipyard workshop. Mr. Minter. After seeing him, a few scattered apprentices bowed their heads and saluted. He waved his hand. You can continue. The apprentices squatted down again or sat on the ground, busying themselves with their work. The outermost area of the workshop was a showroom. Ship models from all over Iradia were displayed one by one. The design of the room was also very ingenious. The cabinets spiraled up along the stairs, and a magic warship that represented the most advanced technology of the era was placed at the top, like a bright pearl. Light shone in from the windows on both sides of the wall, reflecting on the stone floor and singing a long strip of light across the room. Light and darkness formed an overlapping silhouette, like the stripes of a giant dragon. The apprentices would study here for 3 to 5 years, until they had a thorough understanding of the ship's structure, working principles, basic data, and other theoretical knowledge. Only then would they have the opportunity to be selected as disciples by their mentors to learn more advanced manufacturing techniques. At its peak, Corvette's workshop had more than 100 apprentices studying there. Now, there were only 7 children studying in the workshop. Corvette stepped on the alternating light spots and walked into the core area of the shipyard workshop, the forging room. When he pushed open the door, his vision suddenly opened up. 12 huge molten steel pillars supported this extremely spacious room. There were windows on all 4 stone walls, and the roof was covered by an exquisitely designed ventilation system. The furnishings in the forging room were extremely simple, even a little messy. All kinds of casting parts and fasteners were casually piled in the corners, some of them covered in dust and untouched for a long time. "Charlie, how did your discussion with them go?" he asked. A young man in his 20s walked over, shaking his head. "These damn merchants are all vampires. They think that we don't have the ability to repay the debt and are unwilling to give us any funding." After saying that, the young man paused for a moment, then added, "Minter, why don't you want to go to the north to take a look? We haven't found any support in this city since we asked for help. But if you go to the north with your experience and skills, who can stop you from obtaining the bounty?" From the publicity there, the North attaches great importance to the seagoing industry. Your work there will be great support, and you'll be able to focus on the research of the new seagoing ships. I've heard enough of your words. Corvette looked at the only disciple who was willing to stay by his side and said disapprovingly, "You're not sure about the standards of the North shipbuilding. What if we have to start from scratch? And Charlie, you have to remember that we don't build ships for money. If we only build ships for money, we won't be able to build good ships. Because sooner or later, you'll have to rush to make more crude products in order to earn more money. Shipbuilders don't need money, but building ships requires money, Minter." The young man quickly retorted, "Before talking about dreams and feelings, we have to ensure that we can survive." He took a sip of the bitter coffee and continued, "This city can't be saved by your perseverance alone. Even if your skills are at the peak of Iradia, you won't be able to change the fact that Nessie is declining day by day. I've seen enough of the ugly faces of those in power. Without the support of loans, I'm afraid we won't be able to survive this month. Going to the north isn't asking you to give up on your dreams. It's just changing to an environment where you can realize your ideals and ambitions." Corvette didn't say anything after hearing this. Instead, he looked at his proud disciple and asked softly, "Charlie, is this what you think?" Under his mentor's gaze, the young man hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. "It's understandable that you have such thoughts. Young people should explore the outside world. If you want to go, then go. I'll support you." Corvette smiled gently. "But I choose to stay here, Charlie. If everyone chooses to flee, then this city will truly become a dead city. This is my home. My acquaintances, friends, and memories are all here. How can I abandon it? You should understand me. Don't worry, let an old man like me stay here. As long as there are people here, there's still hope for Nessie." Corvette's words were powerful and resonant, and the room became quiet for a moment. After a long while, the young man sighed. "If that's the case, I'll think of something else." He was an orphan and regarded Corvette as his master and father. How could he abandon this old man who was over 60 and leave alone? However, as soon as he finished speaking, he heard a commotion outside. "What are you doing?" The apprentice's shocked and angry voice traveled in, accompanied by the dull thud of a heavy object falling to the ground. Both of them were shocked. Corvette quickly stepped forward and pulled open the door to check the situation in Chun-Li's reception room. The gleaming swords reflected the sunlight, so bright that he could not open his eyes. A group of fully armored guards rushed in and pushed the apprentice to the ground in a rude and unreasonable manner. "Stop, soldiers! What are you doing here?" Corvette berated loudly. As a rather famous shipbuilder, he'd traveled extensively in his youth and met many important people. These soldiers couldn't intimidate him. "Mr. Corvette," the leader of the metal cans paused, only two eyes peeking out of his helmet. He glanced at Corvette expressionlessly and said stiffly, "In view of the city's planning, your dock has been expropriated." "Expropriated?" Corvette was so angry that he laughed. He looked directly at the soldier without fear and rebuked. "I purchased and built this land and dock 20 years ago. It's private property protected by the city's laws. You have no right to expropriate it, no one." "I know." The soldier's eyes were smiling with a bit of mockery. "So, Mr. Corvette, you can bring your proof from back then to the city hall to receive a subsidy of 20 gold coins. 20 gold coins? What a joke." However, no matter how much Corvette resisted, he was dragged out of his dock by the strong soldiers in the blink of an eye. Even when his buttocks came into intimate contact with the cold ground, he still couldn't believe the barbaric treatment he'd received. His eyes were full of disbelief. This city was truly hopeless. Chapter 338. What did the industrial age of the magical world symbolize? Caesar's first thought was the rusty iron cylinders, the thick crankshafts, the huge iron wheels, the rhythmic noises and vibrations, and the sharp whistles that pierced through the sky. Large ships, large cannons, riveted steamed steel. Regarding the construction of large ships, Caesar had reached a bottleneck. He needed to break through it step by step. Caesar then shifted his focus to the development of gunpowder weapons. Inside the munitions factory, 2 holes had been dug. Each hole was circular, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. These holes were the molds that Caesar intended to use to fire the cannon embryos. The inner walls of the holes had been baked by the flames, and the surface of the soil had been burned into a hole, like a layer of outer shell. The holes were filled downwards to obtain a better quality of the wall during firing. The higher the holes were, the more dross and bubbles there would be. The sizes of the holes were calculated by calculating the size of the cannons. Caesar remembered that the so-called 6-pound and 8-pound cannons in the history of his previous life were named after the weight of the cannons. However, in order to dominate this world, Caesar had to increase the weight. So, he decided to cast a few 24-pound cannons for fun. First, he smelted the iron balls. Then, according to the diameter of the iron balls and the thickness of the cannons, he calculated the inner diameter of the mold. However, in order to move such heavy cannons, the amount of gunpowder needed to be increased. So, the final mold should be much bigger than what Caesar had expected. The molten steel rose rapidly, and the steel ingots beside it were also decreasing rapidly. Caesar could not help but be distracted. The production of steel was one of the standards to measure the strength of a country. Although the Blackwing Empire's steel production was not little, in reality, due to the limitations of the material technology, many high-quality special steel could not be made. Even with supernatural powers, it was still impossible. If necessary, they still had to cross the ocean to import. Creating cannons wasn't complicated or difficult because they weren't Caesar's original inventions. The Iradia had long since possessed magical cannons, and they were still dominating the continent's wars. It was also easy for the Northlands to obtain the relevant data. The core structure of a magical weapon was the core. With the help of a spellcaster, it would be easy to replicate and modify the cannon. As the evil dragon monarch, Caesar naturally couldn't stare at the cannon manufacturing process all the time. He only showed his face at the opening of the firing process, and then went back to enjoy his own happy life. It wasn't until some time later that the black dragon appeared again when the boars came to report that the cannon manufacturing process was complete and could be tested. The storm made it difficult for mortals to move, but it couldn't stop the footsteps of the monsters. 5 wyverns were tied with ropes, and they directly flew the 2 cannons to the Tahala Desert. They were cannons, not magical cannons. Caesar instructed the wyverns to carefully lower the cannons and remove the hooks. He personally began to adjust the height of the cannons, leveling the cannons and pushing the poles into the sand. The large caliber cannon was still like a toy in the hands of the black dragon. This cannon fired 24-pound solid iron balls. The shells and gunpowder were all loaded into the barrel and ignited by a fuse. The munitions factory took reference from the mature design of the Alaya magic cannon and customized a lightweight cannon mount for it. In order to increase the durability of the cannon, the parts of the cannon that rubbed against the ground and were subjected to a lot of force during firing had undergone special protection. Actually, while making the solid shells, Caesar had also thought about the feasibility of making a projectile cannon. That kind of weapon was easier to make and had higher damage against living creatures. In his previous life, it was known as the Heartless Cannon. However, the Heartless Cannon was touching, and it relied purely on explosives to kill. During wartime, the demand was too high, and the Blackwing Empire couldn't afford it. This handmade, limited edition, 24-pound giant cannon emitted a dazzling light. However, during the actual test firing, the lineup accompanying it was much simpler than the previous gunpowder test. Other than Caesar, Luna, Hog, and the wild boar in charge of the munitions factory, there were only a few wyverns and battle lizard men accompanying them. After all, this wasn't the first time the cannons appeared in Iradia. In terms of historical significance, it wasn't as important as the steam-powered black gunpowder. Even Caesar himself didn't particularly care about it. After all, it was just a transitional product. How do we do it? Do we go through the process, or do we just ignite it? Although Caesar was quite clear about the structure of the cannon, he was completely clueless about the specific operation. There was no video recording of the operation of the cannon in his 2 souls, so he could only feel the stones and cross the river. Hog, think of a way to kill him. It wasn't that Caesar didn't want to search for professional gunners. In fact, Iradia didn't have such a profession at all. The magic cannon was powered by an energy core, and it only needed to trigger the magic imprint to activate and fire. There was no other way. The fearless Noel had to take this responsibility. He looked around, took out a mop-like cleaning rod from under the cannon mount, and began to pretend to clean the cannon chamber. This was a necessary step, a warning from the black gunpowder. However, because it was the first test firing, the cannon chamber was unusually clean, and the Knoll didn't fiddle with any debris. The wild boar took out a bag of black gunpowder, stuffed it into the cannon, and pressed it tightly. Then Caesar grabbed the shell and put it in. He used a hook to tighten it, took out a drill pipe, and inserted it into the fuse port at the back of the barrel. He punctured the gunpowder bag, and then inserted the fuse wire. In this way, the tedious preparation for firing was completed. Caesar chose to let the wild boar ignite the fire, because after all, it was responsible for this matter in the end. The few monsters present were more reckless, and none of them retreated. The wild boar directly ignited the fuse. Sparks flashed, and there was a loud bang. The high-speed jet of air from the muzzle rolled up the yellow sand, and a layer of smoke rose on the ground. In theory, the effective range of a 24-pound cannon could reach up to a kilometer. The trajectory of the front shell was like a straight line. The rock target 800 meters away was hit by the 24-pound iron ball with a bang, and the whole thing shook. The iron ball's momentum did not decrease, and the powerful impact stirred up a series of sand clouds and finally sank deep into the soil. When the smoke dissipated, Hog and the wild boar immediately ran to the target. They saw that the front of the rock had completely collapsed, and there were already dense cracks spreading out. An eye-catching hole was in the upper right position, and it was slightly deviated from the intended target. However, It was clear that even after the shell met with obstruction and penetrated the target, it still flew forward for nearly 50 meters. Even when it finally sank into the yellow sand, it contained an amazing amount of energy. The power is beyond my expectations. Hogg sighed. Such a weapon had never appeared in the northern part of the mainland. He could already imagine the tragic scene of the enemy gathering together and being pierced by dozens of shells before they could even come into contact with the Blackwing's army. Not bad. Caesar also nodded and gave his affirmation. Take back the shell and inform the munitions factory to prepare for mass production. At this time, a clever little girl interrupted. Hey, Caesar, you detonated the gunpowder with your bare hands last time. Don't you want to try it this time? No. Chapter 339. Some time ago, Caesar's body had already begun a series of stage adjustments. If one were to cut open Caesar's chest and abdomen, they would find that it was not a normal dragon's heart. Caesar's life heart and energy heart had gradually fused together after a period of stable transition. Pumping blood was only a small part of this abnormal heart's function. Most of it was an extremely hot reactor. After a long period of settling down, Caesar began to try to ignite the fire of fusion again. This time was different from the past. His body was already prepared to bear a stronger energy source, sweeping away all possible obstacles. Logically speaking, there was nothing that could stop Caesar from becoming stronger. The tinder in his body shrank and expanded. Unlike the reckless actions he would take when he was on the brink of death, under normal circumstances, Caesar would be quite cautious when taking this step. After all, no one would be able to remain calm when a nuclear weapon was placed in their chest. He completely shut down the radiation reaction emitted by his body, firmly keeping the various rays in his body. Then, he began to continuously push the upper limit of the energy to achieve more intense changes. When the energy curve reached a certain critical value, his fission furnace began to decompose and reassemble. The fusion had begun. At the same time, at the wharf on the west coast of the Blackwing Empire, batch after batch of merchant ships were arriving at the port. The North, which had just been established, had a huge appetite. There was a huge demand for all kinds of things, so there were many merchants who aimed at the business opportunities and took the risk to do business. In fact, as long as they went through proper channels, the trade in the North was much safer than imagined. This experience also brought a good reputation to the Blackwing Empire, making more fleets willing to use the North as a transit point when sailing long distances. A large number of people would also lead to the prosperity of the wharf. This trend had already begun to appear on the West Coast. After the merchant ships arrived at the port, the tax official in black and his assistants immediately went up to them, like cats that smelled fish. The regulation of the free trade zone on the West Coast was very strict. The empire would guarantee your safety and rights, but before that, you had to pay taxes. Perhaps some merchants would find some loopholes in the law to find some ways to avoid taxes, but there was no way to evade taxes. Only taxes and death were inevitable, even in the name of the goddess Wajin. Speaking of Wajin, she and her followers were very willing to do business with the North. And after comprehensive consideration, the empire also gave some preferential treatment to the goddess. They relaxed the policy and allowed her followers to build a small shrine in the free trade zone, but they had to pay for it. Everything on the West Coast was not cheap. The merchants on the ship quickly came to an agreement with the tax officer. The imperial officials checked their goods and left satisfied after collecting the due taxes. It should be emphasized here that the tax officer was only responsible for calculating, recording, and reporting matters. The ones responsible for collecting the money were the orcs and boar people who were directly related to the empire. These two races were not sensitive to money and were absolutely loyal. They could effectively prevent corruption from occurring. Other than the merchants, there were also many outsiders who had migrated from various places on the ship. After the gangplank was lowered, the people carried all kinds of luggage and walked down the bridge. Most of these people were setting foot on this unfamiliar land for the first time. Their expressions were a little confused, and the urging of the sailors on the ship behind them intensified their uneasiness. Other than that, what was even more frightening was the ferocious otherworldlings that could be seen everywhere. The rise of this hybrid empire attracted countless eyes, but the ones who were most interested in it were not the humans, but the various otherworldlings. According to the incomplete statistics of the Imperial Court, the number of otherworldlings that came to the north every day was not less than the humans, or even more. Under the jostling of the crowd, a gray-haired old man accidentally slipped and lost his balance. Just as he was about to fall off the bridge, the young man next to him grabbed his arm and helped him stabilize his body. "Be careful, teacher." The young man helped the old man down the bridge and said, "We're here." The North did not have a registration system. At least the West Coast did not. However, those who wanted to take advantage of the free trade zone had to pay a high price, and some even became one of the skeletons in the wild. The officials did not prevent the establishment of various industries in the free trade zone, but they could not play tricks like robbery and forced sales. However, those who played these tricks were insignificant, so they would soon disappear inexplicably. So this is the North. Corvette drove through the crowded port and the straight, open road. Due to his old age, this master shipbuilder took 2 deep breaths and sighed. This place is much more prosperous than I imagined. Its ruler is a dragon, a black dragon. The young man looked up at the black flag flying high above. I hope it can give us this opportunity. The guard of the Blackwing clan retreated from the Imperial Court, giving their king some time alone. In the depths of the Imperial Court, the terrifying monster that had reached 40 meters in length began to twist its body. The temperature of its body was rising rapidly, and a dark red light flashed on its scales. In Caesar's body, a terrifying change was taking place step by step. The black dragon sneezed, and the breath of flames came out of his nostrils. The few tubes that had appeared in his body before, but had never been used, began to expand and contract. A terrifying substance was entering Caesar's heart along these tubes. It was the plutonium-239 that Caesar's body naturally extracted. The energy reaction broke through Caesar's threshold in the past. Just like in the past, a violent explosion occurred in the black dragon's body, destroying all the tissues in his body like a hurricane, and then began to recover and reorganize. The black dragon let out a painful cry, and the tearing pain from the inside out transmitted to his brain, messing up his thoughts. This black dragon had completely lost the ability to resist external threats. But soon, the fusion fire was completely ignited, and a sense of relaxation quickly replaced all sensory feedback. Majestic energy gushed out from the flame-like energy body and began to flow throughout Caesar's body. And as time passed, the energy output became more and more stable and gradually faded away. Finally, it merged with Caesar's supersized heart. Before falling into a state of deep sleep, the black dragon had completed his evolution. A short period of weakness flashed by, and soon, Caesar stood up again and could move normally. Powerful energy supported every single one of his cells. In fact, Caesar did not know that the fusion fire was just a symbol. The change was comprehensive. In this short but rapid evolution, he had completed the transition to a higher level of life. It was worth mentioning that after igniting the fusion fire, Caesar's body began to emit a pungent rose fragrance. His external appearance was also changing uncontrollably. The specific external characteristics of his body still needed a period of time to settle down before they could be completely revealed. But if a wee dragon appeared beside Caesar, it would already treat him as its own kind. Chapter 340. Right now, Caesar had become a terrifying source of energy. The power driven by nuclear fusion coursed through his muscles and blood vessels, which indirectly caused some changes. The abundant energy pushed up the upper limit of the black dragon's soul. If one were to use a soul detection spell to examine it, they would find that Caesar's soul was much brighter and tougher than a normal dragon's. It was no exaggeration to say that this black dragon had already surpassed the realm of mortals and taken a steady and solid step towards the realm of gods. And this was only the beginning. Caesar opened his eyes and quickly found that something was wrong with his body. As a dragon with a strong sense of vigilance, the expansion of his territory and the increase of his kin did not make the black dragon let down his guard. After gaining the hunting instinct, Caesar was extremely sensitive to malicious gazes. So, after an afternoon nap, Caesar quickly realized that he had fallen into malicious speculation. This feedback made him voluntarily sink into the dark dream. At this moment, the miniature empire below the display case was completely shrouded in fog. Moreover, the fog was still invading the center, gradually reaching the borders of the Blackwing Empire. After realizing this, Caesar ordered the spellcaster team to head to the arcane tower and activate active detection mode. However, the warlock's eyes projected by the arcane tower were unable to cross the Empire's borders. At this moment, the outside of the Empire was shrouded by a hidden force. Caesar tried to fly to the borders and use his psionic energy to scan. Although his psionic energy detection made a certain breakthrough, after a certain distance, it was still pitch black. He could not completely penetrate the blockade from outside the borders. This was not good news. Caesar was aware of the threat. To be honest, the black dragon had been sufficiently restrained during this period of time. He did not take the initiative to provoke any side of the continent. His actions were completely like that of a harmonious ruler. However, someone hiding in the dark did not seem to want him to have an easy time. The black dragon was rather dissatisfied and called for the Manticore leader who was in charge of scouting the borders. For an empire, border security and intelligence gathering were essential. The Dark Mantle Manticore tribe had always shouldered this task and had never encountered any problems. However, until now, they had not even discovered who the hidden enemy was. Up until the moment the black dragon summoned it for questioning, the Manticore leader had not noticed anything unusual at the border. It had to be said that the other party's concealment was quite successful. The Dark Mantle Manticore's abilities were limited after all. They didn't possess any supernatural abilities, so they didn't have the ability to monitor the concealment. However, after receiving the order from the Black Dragon Emperor, the Manticore tribe dispatched 1,000 of their brethren to spread out from the southern border of the empire. They set up surveillance at even further places, patrolling day and night. A week passed by quickly. Outside of the northern lands, there was only the boundless wilderness. Everything was calm and tranquil, as if it was a false alarm. Every Manticore that was sent out returned safely, even though some of them had already scouted far away. However, this result wasn't enough to make Caesar relax. The fog at the border of the dark dream was real, and it was also true that the spellcasters were obstructed. Caesar's judgment was correct. The problem now was that there were too few scouts, and the Empire's borders were too long. Even if the entire Manticore tribe was sent out, it would be impossible to cover everything. Therefore, in order to strengthen their ability to guard against external threats, Caesar called back Angramo and her undead army, releasing them to all corners of the empire and setting up heavy surveillance. Although the ordinary undead were too weak and could be easily wiped out in an instant when faced with powerful creatures, their advantage lay in their large numbers. Furthermore, they could rely on soul communication to share their vision with the higher-level undead. Angramo didn't even need to leave the imperial court to control this precise and efficient scouting system. Without knowing who the enemy was and how strong they were, taking the initiative to attack was unrealistic. Furthermore, the enemy who dared to attack the Blackwing Empire was definitely not weak. Caesar guessed that the enemy was most likely the Penishade dragons who weren't afraid of death. What the Black Dragon didn't know was that his enemies had finally come together. Obo walked into a tavern. The hot and humid smell, mixed with the fragrance of wine, assaulted his senses. Under the dim light, the men took off their shirts, revealing their sweaty backs. They sat by the wine cabinet at the waiter's table, pouring cups of low-quality beer into their mouths as they chatted loudly with their companions. Plump maids weaved between the tables, filling the glasses of the guests. He looked around and quickly found his target, a thin and weak young man sitting in an inconspicuous corner with a rusty dagger on the stool. After a glance, Obio approached the bar counter and ordered cheap beer. He tasted the unique bitterness of a northern wine unhurriedly to see if anyone was secretly watching the young man. He was very satisfied with the outcome. Although there would occasionally be people who would glance at the corner, most of them were unintentional. Only the brawny man who was chatting the loudest at the central table would observe the movements in the corner while he was drinking. The two of them met and took care of each other. This was the characteristic described in the letters sent to him before, and it matched what Obio saw now. "Another one," he shouted to the waiter. "Ice." "Sir, the price of iced beer is doubled," the waiter reminded. Obio threw out 2 copper coins. "Give me the coldest one." Holding the steaming wine glass, he walked to the only empty table. However, before his butt touched the stool, the brawny man who had been shouting at the main table took his seat first. "Brother, this seat is mine." Obio's expression was a little ugly, but after looking at the brawny man, he didn't want to cause trouble in the end. He swallowed his anger and walked to another table. He said to the owner of this table, "Do you mind sharing a seat?" The young man in the corner looked up and glanced at him. "Up to you." "Thank you." Obio smiled and sat down opposite him. "Sorry to keep you waiting. This is King's City. There are black robes and wild beasts everywhere." "I thought you were all removed," the young man said angrily. The young man said grumpily, "Looks like the higher-ups are right. There are quite a few of you who have been buried. Now it's time for you to show off. Speak. Do you want to find information, investigate clues, or create chaos and disturb the public? Or destroy some important organization?" "No, these methods are too low-level. The higher-ups want you to—" The young man revealed the dark eyes under the hood and said in a low voice, "Assassinate. This is not within our ability. It's too difficult." Bo shook his head. "Everyone knows very well that not to mention it, even the clan leaders under it, are not something we can touch. If we send in more powerful people, it will be easy to be discovered. Of course, we won't let you do an impossible mission." The young man shook his finger and said, "The target is a little goblin with no ability to protect itself. It just has some magic items on it." It sounded a little simple. Obio sat up straight and showed a trace of thought. "Where is it?" "Deep in the Black Wing Court," the young man said. Seeing the sudden change in Obio's expression, the young man added, "Don't be in a hurry to change your face. It is indeed by that guy's side now, but it won't always be there." The Dragon Queen gave an oracle. Every once in a while, the forest goblin will transform and leave the Blackwing Palace and go to the Elegy Tavern on the next street. That will be your chance. It's not easy at the Elegy Tavern either. Obio smacked his lips and said in a low voice, "It is indeed not easy, so it's best to do it on the road." The young man said, "I don't know how many of you have not been removed, but this is your only chance. If you can't do it, I believe your God will not be satisfied. This plan is not something our God can come up with." Obio sighed. "It is a shame to be in the same team as you. Perhaps, as if we want to stay with you humans." The young man shrugged. "But in this situation, we can only succeed if we work together, right?" Chapter 341. A gentle breeze blew through her long hair. It was gentle and fragrant, just like a mother's caress. She listened to the birds singing and felt the pulse of the river. The magic leaf was like a small boat, carrying her along with the wind, sailing towards the curtain of light that was gradually appearing in the sky. Luna felt that the world was so sweet, just like the afternoon sun. Happiness came from the bottom of her heart and spread throughout her body. As time passed, the day of her adulthood was approaching. Long ago, her parents had been urging her to go home. In a few days, she would return to her hometown to complete her coming-of-age ceremony. But what made Luna happy was that she had just told Caesar about it, and the big, silly dragon had agreed to go home with her. "Happy, don't mess around this time." While jumping for joy, Luna could not help but remind Caesar. The last time the Black Dragon went to the Elven Forest, it was very unpleasant. Many people in the Elven Forest had a knot in their hearts because of it. Even Luna could not say that she did not care about it. Caesar was also very clear about this and knew that he had to take care of the little one's feelings. He nodded honestly. These were all for later. Now, let's play a round of elegy. Luna slid out of the palace garden, then used the transformation necklace to cast a spell on herself, turning into a young human with the characteristics of the North. She glanced at the nonchalant wyvern guards and began to walk out. People came and went on the streets. Blackwing City was the Empire's political, economic, and cultural center. Of course, it was also the most prosperous city in the North. Other than 50,000 permanent residents, there was also an unknown number of Blackwing troops stationed there. More than 30,000 people came and went in and out of the city. A long time ago, the city walls of Blackwing City had been torn down. Now, it was in the midst of continuous expansion. Remember this person. OBO and the young man Luna had transformed into brushed past each other. He looked down at the faintly glowing emblem in his hand and gave a look to the people beside him. This is our target. OBO did not choose to act immediately. In order to confirm the target, his companions had spread out in the streets. There was a possibility of failure if he acted rashly. After seeing the target enter the Elegy Tavern with his own eyes, OBO began to gather people, preparing to assassinate the target when she was on her way back. These people who had snuck into Blackwing Capital City and had already taken root here quickly gathered together. You. In a dark corner, OBO pointed at 3 of his weaker companions. You guys enter the Elegy Tavern and come out with the target. Your mission is to block the exit and not give the target a chance to escape. You're in charge of keeping watch. Monitor the movements of the black-robed men and the foreign species in the surroundings and provide feedback at all times. This is very important so that we can choose the right time to act. Casa, help me later. Use the divine emblem to remove the magical items that might be on the other party's body. Also, if the other party casts a spell to escape, remember to stop him. Reynolds, once we make a move, you'll be responsible for creating more chaos and fighting for a chance to escape. However, whether or not we can leave this place alive, we can only hope for the blessings of the gods. Bo arranged everything that happened next, but he did not notice that while he was whispering, the bustling crowd on the streets gradually thinned out. A deep fog surged out of nowhere, covering the ground and surrounding them. The darkness surrounded the head of the dragon, floating above the roof and looking down at the crowd coldly. Wind chimes shook and trembled secretly. The people could only see the long and sharp snout and the slightly opened upper and lower jaws, revealing dense and small teeth, which could swallow several adults alive. 2 small horns meandered backward from the top of its head. Its dark blue eyes flickered like will-o'-the-wisps. There were no scales on its body, and it did not have the strong and sturdy body that people knew of dragons. The skeletal dragon, Yuga Angramo Tangerine. This name was the most horrible and cruel nightmare in the Blackwing Empire. The Northlanders would rather be caught by the Black Shirt and thrown into the dungeon to be tortured by the battle lizard men than to meet it, even if it was just a glance. The fog did not stop rolling. One had to concentrate to find that it was the black fog that surrounded the skeletal dragon. It was as thick as clouds. The scene was so quiet that one could hear a low and rhythmic buzzing sound, which came from the soul fire surging in the skeletal dragon's body. Its sound was very weak, but it was endless. I didn't expect that someone would be tempted by Queen Luna. The draconic language was spoken in a deep tone, and no one could understand it. They are all threats and must be eliminated. The skeletal dragon's voice became a reminder, and the crowd burst into an uproar. Some screamed and fled in all directions. Some stood still and did not dare to move, and some took up their weapons as if they were fighting for their lives, ready to launch an attack. OBO, the instigator of the plan, was the last one. He drew out the magic sword that he had recently obtained, poured all his fear and hope into a roar, and rushed towards Angramo. The skeletal dragon let out a low laugh. as if it was amused by the ignorance and arrogance of these people. She took a step forward, and 5 skeletal claws reached out from the darkness and slammed on the ground. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew everyone down, and only Obio could barely stand. The warrior's charge was interrupted, and when he turned sideways, he realized that he was sweating all over. He roared at the top of his lungs and was ready to continue charging forward. But he found that the endless black fog had surged up, and the skeletal dragon was hidden in the darkness, and no one knew where it was. "God bless you," someone cried out in pain. "God may really bless you, and what I have to do is to send you to meet your God." The shadow in the distance suddenly expanded, and it was accompanied by the screams and wails of those who were running away. Obio raised his sword and stood in the same place, not knowing what to do, but at least he was relatively clear-headed. A few people squatted at the foot of the wall, holding their heads with their arms and shivering, having lost their faith. Soon, the dragon emerged from the shadows above their heads, each of its claws holding a human, who was still desperately trying to pry the dragon's claws open. In front of Obio, the dragon put the human into its mouth and with a crack cut off the head like it was eating celery, and then threw the headless body on the street. The skeletal dragon turned its head, and with its deep eye sockets, stared at the people who had already escaped far away. Soul siphon. Soon, the surging magic power drained the strength of the deserters. Although there were no wounds on their bodies, their lungs were too weak to expand, and their hearts were too weak to beat. All of their muscles were like loose springs. When the smoke dispersed, everyone fell down silently. Obio roared again, but before he could charge forward, the dragon's tail came out of nowhere and swept the warrior. The warrior fell flat on his face, and the blood from the headless body sprayed all over him. Then the skeletal dragon disappeared again, and there were screams in the distance again, and 2 more bodies were thrown down. A much softer roar was heard again, and then without any suspense, the warrior was defeated. Even the others who were trembling understood that the skeletal dragon was enjoying the pleasure of hunting and torturing. Seeing Obio's courage and bravery disappear after being attacked by the skeletal dragon again and again, the roars gradually turned into screams. For the last time, Obio sat on the pile of corpses, lost all his strength, and could not stand up again. Angramo's sinister laughter echoed in the fog of the streets and alleys. She had crushed the courage and dignity of a brave warrior. The skeletal dragon took a deep breath and slowly exhaled a thick black fog. The fog covered the entire street, shrouding Obio and the remaining humans. When the black fog spread, no matter if it was rocks or solid objects, there was no damage, but the living people in the corner fell to the ground. Boring, Angramo thought. This was a battle without any suspense, and she wanted to end it all. Ugh! The laughter that made one's teeth ache ended with an unexpected tone. The skeletal dragon saw a ball of light in the dark corner. It came from Obio, who could not stand up, but was still alive. The warrior held the shining emblem tightly. It was this light that blocked the soul absorption. Angramo looked at the emblem and thought for a while. This is not a spontaneous action by you. The skeletal dragon's soul flame surged. It stared at the remaining living people and spoke in the common language that they could understand. Tell me the mastermind behind this. The light of the emblem brought strength to the conspirators and gave them hope again. Perhaps this thing could stop the skeletal dragon. However, their hope was soon shattered. Angramo hooked her claw, and the emblem flew out of her hand. Ugh! A constant detection light, a protection spell, and a spell to break spells. The emblem wailed in the claws of the skeletal dragon, and then it broke. It seems that your master does not value you. I thought God's blessing would appear. Obio trembled. Their lives were about to come to an end. Although the skeletal dragon did not eat flesh, it devoured souls. Chapter 342. Angramo had wanted to wipe out all possible threats, But the divine emblem she found by chance changed her mind. These people were just minions, and there was someone else behind the scenes. Perhaps it had something to do with the blockade of the Empire's borders, she thought. The skeletal dragon lowered its head and looked at the remaining human with its huge eye sockets that were surging with soul fire. Your master has abandoned you. The skeletal dragon gathered the corpses around it, and the wandering souls wailed in its claws. They're dead, but you're still alive. I hope you're a smart man. Tell me who's behind this. Obo was overwhelmed by the undead dragon's aura. He knelt on the ground as blood flowed down from his head to one side of his face. The pale light in the black fog returned the golden color to his hair, as if a ray of hope had suddenly appeared. The warrior looked up at the pitiful souls, his eyes showing a melancholy that the undead could not understand. Suddenly, a bitter smile appeared on his face, and the fire of life that was burning brightly suddenly extinguished. He died instantly without Angramo's help. When Obo's face showed a strange expression, the skeletal dragon sensed that something was wrong. In an instant, it reacted quickly and tried to use necromancy to absorb the soul of the dead, but it was still too late. The soul of the human was crushed by some unknown force and dissipated. She lowered her head and looked at the souls in her claws, only to find that they were ignorant fragments without any memory or wisdom. A devout believer, Angramo confirmed. Her voice was a little annoyed and confused. He shouldn't belong to the Dragon Mother. Whether it was Caesar or the other clan leaders under the Black Dragon who had the ability to think for themselves, they subconsciously thought that the enemy this time was probably Tiamat and her Penishade dragons. However, the truth seemed to be different. Judging from Tiamat's faction, it was not easy for her to have believers who were willing to die for her. It was impossible for her to give up so easily. The skeletal dragon knew that it should inform Caesar about this matter, but did not leave immediately because it was worried that Luna might have a backup plan. It was very obedient and did not enter the Elegy Tavern to disturb Luna. Instead, it slowly retreated into the black fog and hid itself again. In the afternoon, the streets became clear again. People quickly filled every corner of the streets. A bone dragon suddenly appeared in the city. Even if it was a mixed city like the Blackwing Kingdom, it should have caused a huge commotion. However, the streets were very calm, as if nothing had happened. If one stayed in the royal city for a period of time and observed carefully, they would discover a terrifying fact. A portion of the people who came and went in the royal court always had a rigid face. They never spoke, nor did they look around. Their expressions were always the same. It failed. What a pity. When Joan Arthur heard the news, he could not help but mutter to himself. Although he was also a believer of the god of war, Quel'Thuzad, he was not an inflexible person who did not know how to adapt. On the contrary, he very much hoped that the assassination plan would succeed. Due to the absolute advantage of the gods in obtaining information, whether it was him, the believers of the god of hunting, or the Penishade dragons, they were very clear about the importance of the forest sprite to the Black Dragon. If they could kill the little thing, the Black Dragon and Tangerine might lose their minds and go crazy. And that was exactly what they wanted. Joan Arthur rode at the forefront of the team. They had entered the northern boundary and were about to meet up with their allies. The army of Coer spread out behind him, like a forest of halberds, swords, shields, and spears, slowly moving east. That night, they set up camp in the southern border of the desert, next to the nest of the ancestral blue dragon tyrant. At this time, an adult green dragon arrived and brought the latest news from the front line. Our king asked me to tell you that she has already made contact with the Blackwing Empire. More than 10 Manticores will probably never be able to return to report to the Black Dragon and Tangerine. The green dragon landed in front of Joan Arthur. Although he was the master of the city of Coer and the legendary sword saint, his tone was still not polite. Now, we have more than 20 companions scattered at the northern border, blocking all detection spells from the enemy. You have sealed off their border. What is the reaction of the Black Dragon? Joan Arthur asked. Hold back and wait for changes. The mutated dragon Tangerine has a very high degree of intelligence. According to the information we have gathered, before he knows what is going on, he will not take the initiative to attack. The green dragon replied, but that guy has sent a large number of scouts to spread out at the border. As time passes, he will know the real situation soon and take back the vision one by one. So you have to go around the northern border from the rear and attack the elven forest as soon as possible. The green dragon spoke in the usual tone of an evil dragon. He then glanced at Joan Arthur's troop deployment. Tiamat has traced back that place is the home of the forest fairies. If there is any danger, the Black Dragon Lord will most likely go to the rescue. You have to force the mutated dragon to move out of his territory. This is not difficult for you. Not difficult. This is simply courting death. Joan Arthur gripped the hilt of his sword. The Elven Forest is a place where a group of kind races live. It is not something that can be taken down in a short time. When we are dragged into the quagmire of war, the Black Dragon will rush over from behind. I'm not asking you to take down the Elven Forest. You only need to hurt those cowardly and kind races and lure the mutated dragon over. The green dragon glanced at him. As long as the Black Dragon Lord is not there, our king can cut through his so-called empire. And that guy is actually ignorant of magic. He does not have the ability to use teleportation spells. He is not as fast as you think. It is still not easy. Joan Arthur pursed his lips. What we have is not enough for my soldiers to take such a risk. Then you have to ask your god. The green dragon had finished conveying the message. He was not interested in talking to these annoying humans. He flapped his wings and returned to his nest. Alex's ultimate goal this time was not to defeat or kill the Black Dragon Lord, Caesar Tangerine. That would be difficult. And recently, the mutated dragon seemed to have become stronger. Alex could not do it with her current ability. Whether it was her or the followers of the other two gods, the instructions they had received were not about the Black Dragon itself, but about Tangerine's territory and followers. Their god had asked them to find a way to destroy the Black Dragon's logistics and shelter, so that he would have no place to stay in Iradia. After that, the mutated dragon Caesar would be hunted down by the three gods. He was bound to be hunted down endlessly by the gods and face the end of his road. This was a powerful enemy. In the main material plane, it had the ability to resist the suppression of the gods. It was difficult to kill it in one blow, but Tiamat still had a way to deal with it. In fact, many mutated dragons have been hunted to death by her in this way. The reason why she wanted to kill the forest sprite to make the Black Dragon go crazy was also for this reason. Because of the special nature of the gods, unless they wanted to die, they were always in an invincible position in the main material plane. But the creatures that lived here were different. It was difficult for them to break free from this boundary, and the astral plane was even more dangerous. Chapter 343. A crescent moon floated above the desert. John Arthur agreed to the Pinochet Dragon's multi-front battle plan and led the army to the Elven Forest. The three columns were like a thick steel snake, winding into the northern territory. They circled around the border of the Blackwing Empire, crossed the Rapids River, and left from the north. John Arthur rode at the front of the troop, accompanied by his twin brother, the dragon hunters BYFF and Darrow. Behind him was the entire army that he had brought along this time, including spellcasters, knights, pike cavalry, archers, and many crossbowmen. It took them a few hours to complete the transmigration. After that, John Arthur would always recall the time when he was closest to the Blackwing Empire's security perimeter. He would occasionally hear the howls of wild beasts in the darkness. He clearly realized that he was not encircling an evil dragon, but a crusade against a country. The main force against the Blackwing Empire was the Pinochet Dragons of Aledia. After the end of the previous war, the number of Pinochet dragons active in the north did not decrease at all. On the contrary, they were continuously replenished, and their numbers were even greater than before. These red dragons, blue dragons, and green dragons were hiding within the lava, sand, and dense forests. Under Alex's command, they were prepared to think of ways to destroy the newly prosperous country. No matter the outcome, good or bad, they had already put all their eggs in one basket. On the second night, night had already fallen, dyeing all the flags black. The army of Koer set up camp to rest between the rolling hills and the elven forest. Fireflies scuttled between the tents like wandering stars. The huge, bloody corpse of a bull was placed above the blazing campfire, skewered with a barbecue fork as thick as a small tree. In fact, the fork was indeed a small tree. Blood and oil dripped into the flames as two warriors worked together to slowly rotate the bull. John Arthur was surrounded by the troops of the Free Trade City-State and the permanent army of Koer City. But now, he had brought them thousands of miles to the north. The loss of more than 20,000 soldiers would definitely bring about a series of problems. Leader de Shammer would also know about it soon. Hence, time was of the essence. Not only was Blue Dragon Alex impatient, but John Arthur himself knew that he could not leave this army outside for too long. After a night, a pale white mist floated from the night sky, like long white fingers on the river. Men and horses opened their sleepy eyes in the chill of dawn, stumbling as they moved their bodies. They were busy fastening the saddles, loading the heavy weapons onto the carriages, and extinguishing the campfire. The horn sounded. After a night of recuperation, Joan and Arthur felt that his army was ready to begin the battle. The knights leapt onto their panting, mixed-blood war horses. The footmen strapped on their swords as they ran, and the archers followed at the back of the army. However, in just a moment, Joan Arthur's extraordinary senses allowed him to sense that something was not right. After listening attentively, he heard a commotion coming from the outpost that was quite a distance away from the main force. The shouts of soldiers, the clashing of spears, the neighing of horses, and the roars of beasts all entered his ears. He hadn't given the order to attack yet, so logically speaking, there shouldn't be any sounds of fighting coming from the front. My lord, just as John Arthur was deep in thought, a messenger hurriedly ran out of the fog. The soldier was fully armed, mounted on a horse, and wearing a full helmet that had been battered. "What's going on?" John Arthur asked. "The elven forest has discovered us and launched an attack," the messenger said. "They took advantage of the night to sneak around the outpost. They are less than a mile to the east of us. We don't know how many of them there are." After hearing this, Joan Arthur didn't have time to think. He made a prompt decision and rushed out with his trusted knights. "All troops, get into battle formation and charge." Damn it! Isn't the elven forest a place where the kind races gather? How could they attack first and initiate a war before we have made our stand clear? This is not how the kind races do things. The morning sun rose from the horizon, and rays of pale red light extended from the east. The sky in the west was dark purple, dotted with a few stars. The sound of the bugle sounded in the army of Koer. It was low and mournful, making one's soul tremble and blood boil. In terms of luxurious equipment, the army of the Central Trading City-State was definitely the best in Iradia. For example, the Koer army now, even the bugle was a rare magical item. When John Arthur arrived at the battlefield of the outpost, the mist in the air was gradually evaporated by the rising sun. The grass that the horses ate was covered with dew, like diamonds scattered on the ground. The dragon hunters followed closely behind him, and a large number of trusted knights were on standby. Even from afar, John Arthur's equipment was dazzling. Even the king's gold and jade clothes could not compare. His cloak was woven with countless mithril threads, so heavy that it was difficult to make it float when charging. Once on the horse, it would almost completely cover the horse's hind legs. His armor was heavy elemental black steel, covered with a layer of silver-white enamel. His knee pads and gloves were covered with complex carvings, as bright as light. This set of equipment did not seem to be of much use in battle, but it was very charming as a decoration. However, in reality, this was not the case. John Arthur's armor was full of permanent magic buffs, and the overall effect was not inferior to a legendary armor. The actual burden on his body was almost zero. In the light of dawn, John Arthur's heavy cavalry climbed up the mountain like a slowly blooming steel rose, the spikes shining brightly. At this time, John Arthur could already see his opponents. Just as the intelligence said, the main combat force of the elven forest was the shape-shifting druids, the scythe-wielding chastity hunters, the swift giant eagles, and the strong and ferocious chimeras. However, he was still very puzzled as to why the enemy would take the initiative to attack. The outpost troops hid behind a wall of shields and spears, blocking every wave of attacks from the elven forest. However, the attacks of these kind races were more ferocious than expected, and the troops had suffered heavy losses. Fortunately, they had completed their mission and successfully stalled the enemy. Now, it was the foreign race's turn to bleed. For Cola, John Arthur roared, and his trusted troops immediately followed. Although the dragon hunters did not shout, they also gripped their weapons tightly. For Kohler. The low and long horn suppressed the horns of the foreign races, and John Arthur led a team of elite heavy cavalry into the battlefield. Right in front of them, a small team of Tia elves formed a half-moon formation, their crossbows all loaded, like a hedgehog waiting to strike. The arrows of the elven forest greeted them like hailstones. 10, 100, and in an instant, countless arrows greeted them. However, not a single one of the heavy cavalry fell because of the arrows. These weak, short arrows did not cause any real damage to them. The cavalry turned into a torrent, charging forward with great momentum. Just as they were about to crush the elven squad into powder, a huge chimera suddenly appeared, cutting off their path, blocking the elven squad that couldn't retreat in time. The chimera's 3 heads spewed out breaths of different natures. However, it could not stop the charge of the heavy cavalry, because in the next second, it was knocked to the ground by a rock spike. The spellcasters of Kohler could not be ignored, and were also playing a role. For a moment, the scene was chaotic. Chapter 344. Of course, Caesar would not put Luna in an unsafe situation, but to prevent the little one from harboring ill feelings, he would not send people to guard her openly. However, with the shapeshifters in the capital, the Ankhegs buried deep underground, and the undead skeletons, the forest sprite could be protected from all sides at all times. The Blackwing Kingdom was a veritable city of monsters. Those who could come into contact with Luna were all good citizens who had been heavily vetted and confirmed to be no threat. As for those with ill intentions, they would be discovered in advance if they made any unusual movements. After receiving Angramo's report, the enemy's actions against Luna had thoroughly angered the Black Dragon. The Blackwing Empire entered a state of full preparation for war. The clans scattered across the land quickly gathered and arrived at the front lines. Under such detailed surveillance, Caesar quickly discovered the traces of the enemy. A small team of Dragonkin entered Caesar's field of vision. They were hiding at the entrance to the north, but when the national machinery was fully operational under the will of the Black Dragon, the Blackwing Empire regained control of the north in almost a day. All unusual movements were under the gaze of the Black Dragon Emperor. This Dragonkin team had 20 wyverns, an equal number of javelin chasers, and 50 pitchfork-wielding drakons and lizardmen. This was a standard patrol team that could engage in small-scale battles. And with such a configuration, there were 7 teams exposed in Caesar's field of vision. These patrol teams relied on each other and built a large number of boulder towers at the border of the north. Every 3 towers encircled a camp, distributed among the deserts, hills, and swamps. These towers looked like rough products that were rushed out. Some were even badly slanted. Not long after they were built, there were already cracks on the surface. Father, after seeing this scene through the shared vision, Angramo let out a hoarse laugh. These laughable defenses are simply a trap. The Black Dragon squinted its eyes and said, "It doesn't look like much, but these towers built according to the terrain are far easier to defend and harder to attack than what you see. They are enchanted with magic and control the surrounding area from 3 different directions. If you want to attack one of them, you will be exposed to the attacks of the other 2 towers from the beginning." The simple fortifications were nothing to the Black Dragon, who came from another world. However, What puzzled Caesar was that the enemy was obviously on the offensive side. Why would they cower and build defensive fortifications? Were they afraid of war with the North? Then how could they attack? Why not just retreat to their home? What were his opponents thinking? Soon, the Black Dragon understood. He had received a message from the elven forest. Through the crystal, Garcia had requested help from her ally. She told the Black Dragon Lord that there was a human army of more than 10,000 that was waging war against the elven forest. According to the analysis of the enemy's flag, the army came from the trading city-state of Kour. Although the benevolent races had completed a power shift and military reshuffling under Kasia's reforms, the elven forest was still powerless against the well-equipped human army that had more than 5 legends. After the first wave of ambushes ended, the elven forest was quickly suppressed and forced into a passive state. Caesar rummaged through his memories and finally remembered his relationship with the free trading city-state. A long time ago, after choosing to protect the half-lich Ryan, the so-called city lord of Kour had sent a team to the green fields to ask for him. However, they were rejected by Caesar directly, drawing him a new enemy. He did not even think about the legendary party that was destroyed by his fission breath all those years ago. Because he was too casual at the time, he did not investigate the origins and cause of those people, and was thus completely ignored by the Black Dragon. So they are definitely enemies. Caesar thought for a moment. It seemed that the evil dragon mother had found a new ally for her power in Iradia, which gave the Pinochet dragons the courage to move against the North once again. If that was the case, the fortifications around the North made sense. The enemy wanted to use their advantage of having more legendary creatures to fight the Empire on multiple fronts, while at the same time preventing a core point from being destroyed by an unreasonable wave of attacks. Therefore, they had no choice but to take some measures. Playing tactics? Caesar was amused. After some thought, he ordered Angramo, bring the undead army to the elven forest as reinforcements. Also, bring along the 24-pounder cannons that were delivered a few days ago. Be quick, you must protect the elven forest. Strictly speaking, the elven forest was not a strategic location of the Blackwing Empire, nor was it a vassal of the Empire. There was no value in conquering it. The Pinochet dragons must have some connection with Kour. The reason why they did not attack the elven forest after sealing off the north peripheral vision was undoubtedly to lure Joshua there, and then create a huge wave of attacks on the main battlefield. However, the enemy's strategic intentions were too obvious. Of course, Caesar would not go along with their plans. Therefore, he decided not to go himself, and instead let Angramo lead its undead army to support the elven forest, alleviating the pressure on the front lines. From another perspective, he had to thank Kour. After all, the elven forest was Luna's home, and there was a big gap between them because of the Black Dragon's recklessness. Caesar had been troubled by how to face Luna's parents and family. The appearance of Kour's army gave the Black Dragon a chance to ease the tension between them. Thank you, so I'll give you a big gift. After the skeletal dragons left, Caesar's eyes flashed. He turned around and crawled into the depths of the palace, going straight underground. The deep tunnel was unusually slippery, and the walls were covered in moss. Caesar walked through the black mud, leaving huge footprints. In front of him, the four-headed demonic hound smelled the pungent scent of dried roses on the Black Dragon Lord from afar. It lowered its head to show respect. Caesar pushed open the steel door, and an empty echo echoed in the underground palace. 2 monsters were lying on the ground. They were up to 20 meters in size, and all the hair on their bodies had shed. Their bodies were completely black, and only their foreheads had a crimson mark that looked like a flame. They were in a deep sleep, and the intense radiation they emitted was stronger and weaker as they breathed. Husky Nero. The Black Dragon walked through the underground palace with light steps and walked to their side. The bodies of the 2 monsters were even bigger than the adult dragons of this generation, and the aura they emitted was no less than a dragon's aura. Have you slept enough? The Black Dragon looked down at them for a while, and then spoke, waking the 2 monsters that had not shown their faces in the outside world for a while. Husky sniffed the black dragon's paw and opened its eyes. Two pairs of golden eyes met. "Master, your majesty." The two monsters stood up. "How's your body getting used to it?" Caesar reached out his paw to stroke the wyvern's head, while Husky playfully licked his paw. The terrifying monster after the mutation was as docile as a kitten. "We can return to the surface at any time." Nero walked in front of him and pressed its forehead against his paw. "Very good," Caesar said. "Angramo has led its undead descendants to the elven forest. The enemy is a human army. Your mission is to follow them. I heard that there are 5 legends in that army, and kill them all." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.